At the same time, she blamed Ba Daojiang and asked him to let go of her hand and let her go. Alright, let's not worry about other things at this time. The sixth young master is waiting for us upstairs. Let's go. Ba Daojiang knew what Shui Qing was thinking. Women were always shy. However, he really didn't have time to wait. Who knew if there would be some urgent matter that would call the sixth young master back? If that was the case, he would miss a great opportunity. Just now, the platoon leader took the opportunity to tell the sixth young master about him. This kind of opportunity was hard to come by. Holding Shui Qing's hand, he jogged all the way to the third floor of the restaurant and stood in front of Yang Chendong. When she saw Yang Chendong with her own eyes, Shui Qing's heart, which was already racing from jogging all the way, started to beat even faster. The current Yang Chendong was like a god in the eyes of the Yangtze people and the five-star army. Especially after the publicity department had been instructed to deliberately create a cult of personality, his reputation had spread at a rapid pace. As the most important middle-level cadre in the publicity department, Shui Qing naturally regarded Yang Chendong as a god. Now that she was able to get close to the god in her heart, Shui Qing was very excited. You must be Shui Qing. Not bad. He looked at Shui Qing and found that this girl had a great temperament. Especially when she was wearing the lieutenant colonel uniform, it made her look even more valiant and full of an indescribable heroic spirit. This girl was quite compatible with a burly man like Ba Daojiang. A single word of praise made Shui Qing's face blossom into a smile, like a lotus flower emerging from the water. Her face carried a brilliant yet somewhat bashful smile. Thank you for the king's praise. With Shui Qing's status, she could only call Yang Chendong king. She couldn't casually call him king. No problem, Director Shui Qing. You can call me sixth young master like Ba Daojiang. Yang Chendong smiled and said with a warm voice. In order to make Shui Qing feel less restrained, Yang Chendong smiled and asked about work. He knew that when interacting with people, he had to start with the areas that they were most familiar with. This way, he could quickly eliminate the barriers between them. As expected, when it came to reporting work, Shui Qing became less shy and more shrewd and capable. Yes, sixth young master. Under the guidance of Logistics Commander Yang, our publicity department just carried out an expansion of recruitment. To be honest, there are many girls who are good at singing and dancing in the grasslands. We went through a serious selection process. After the political investigation department participated in the selection process, we recruited a total of 1,200 new members. Now, they have been divided into 12 publicity teams and have begun to perform in various places. The performance team on the streets of Turpan City today is one of them. They are currently performing the defense of Turpan City not long ago. We used the Turpan brothers, Tumu, as the model and added some exaggerated techniques to create this performance. Listening to Shui Qing's report, Yang Chendong was also interested. He knew about Tumu. This person was a local of Turpan City. At first, he wanted to earn money, so he joined the defense of Turpan City. Later on, he fully displayed his ability to fight on the battlefield. Now, he was already a company commander of 100 soldiers. Although his position wasn't very high, as a local of Turpan, he could be a representative and a model to promote. More often than not, the more grassroots people would resonate with them. It could be said that this was a very good example. Yes, I know about Tum. You chose him as the model, so your train of thought is correct. Then, tell me, how are the results? Yang Chendong wanted to know what kind of changes the performance of the publicity team could bring to the overall situation. After all, if the performance was only for the sake of completing the mission, but there were no results, then the performance would lose its true meaning. At this moment, Shui Qing's face revealed a confident expression. Sixth young master, the results are very good. With Tumu as the model, the recruitment office has already sent a notice. Now, there are many people who have signed up. They are already too busy. Oh? Not bad, not bad. Yang Chendong was very satisfied with the results. To be able to recruit more soldiers from the local area was naturally something that he was happy to see. They were familiar with the local situation and had long adapted to the local climate. With them, the combat troops could take fewer detours. Listening to Yang Chendong's praise, Shui Qing's face was even sweeter than eating honey, and her small face was bright red. Seeing that Yang Chendong was in a good mood, Beta Persei also thought of some things he had heard before. He decided to put in more effort and put in some good words for Shui Qing. When he was pursuing Kikage, this director Shui Qing helped him a lot. He would not forget this favor. Young master, I heard that since the performance of the publicity team, the people have a better understanding of our army and some of our policies, so the voices and emotions against us have decreased a lot. There's such a thing. Listening to Beta Persei's further explanation, Yang Chendong laughed out loud. Very good, this is the change brought to people's lives and work by literature and art. Well, I hope the publicity department will continue to expand the performance team. I think 10 teams are a bit too few. I'll talk to Yang Si later, it should be expanded. 100 is not a lot. Since Yang Chendong said so, Shui Qing immediately agreed happily and kept nodding. She would not forget that when she wanted to expand the publicity department, she had to persuade Yang Si for a long time. If she did not have the backing of the 6th Madam, Luan Xiaoyu, she was afraid that the expansion of these 10 teams would not be supported. But now it was different. With Yang Chendong's endorsement, it would be much easier to go to the logistics headquarters to ask for people and money. Even the 6th young master was so supportive of their work and praised their work. Who would dare to neglect it? Who would not listen to the 6th young master's words? This meeting was a happy one for everyone. After all, Yang Chendong had too many things to do. He stayed in the restaurant for a while and watched the performance below. He saw that there were more and more people gathering around, and they all revealed looks of curiosity, especially some young people. No matter if they were men or women, they all revealed looks of yearning. Yang Chendong knew that the performance of the publicity team could continue to be carried out in order to win more people's hearts and gain more people's support. Speaking of publicity teams, it was very difficult for the people to see them in the past. Occasionally, some vaudeville troupes could perform on the streets. There was no Peking opera in that era. And where could they find so many handsome men and beautiful women in such troupes? Where could they find such good and diverse education and story themes? The publicity team was a pioneer. As soon as they appeared, they attracted everyone's attention. Regardless of whether they were men or women, old or young, they liked them very much. It was precisely because they liked him that they were willing to learn more about him. Then, they would know more about the 5-star army in Yangshi. This kind of publicity could often achieve something that even 1,000,000 soldiers couldn't do. When Yang Chendong brought people to watch the performance on the streets and did not return, the 1st Cavalry Division had already taken down Yanghe City and was cleaning up the battlefield. Chapter 1289. The newly appointed commander of the 4th Regiment, Su Kuda, looked at the corpses of the Turpan soldiers strewn about in front of him and felt a wave of dizziness. If his memory served him right, the battle had only lasted for an hour, but the 7,000 Turpan soldiers in the city had been utterly defeated. Just the 4th Regiment that he led had killed over 400 of the enemy, capturing close to 1,000. The most inconceivable thing was that not a single one of his soldiers had died in battle. Only 4 of them had been injured, and most of them were light injuries. They only needed to be treated before they could return to the battlefield. This was completely different from the bloody battle he had imagined. Although before the 1st Cavalry Division had entered the city, Leng Feng and the 4th Regiment had already used their cannons to blast through the city gates, preventing them from bearing the burden of sieging the city, but after entering the city, the performance of the cavalry under him was simply too valiant. Any Turpan soldier in front of them was easily defeated by a single charge, to the point that the enemy did not even have the strength to retaliate. Rather than calling it a battle, it was more accurate to call it a massacre. He had long heard that the 1st Cavalry Division was the most valiant cold weapon unit in the 5-star army, but having experienced it personally, he could not imagine it to be so valiant. In comparison, he felt that the victories he had won in the past did not count as much. In fact, they could not even be called great victories, and could only be described as obvious victories. Su Kuda couldn't be blamed for this. In the past, he had led an army of foreign races. Although there were some soldiers with good physical fitness, they didn't have much organization. It was difficult for them to coordinate well in battle. Yang Chendong also didn't give them more time to train. He simply let these soldiers search for experience on the battlefield. With the mentality of eliminating sand from the waves, this kind of army often didn't have much fewer casualties than the enemy. After spending so much time with such an army, it would be strange if he was not surprised to see the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division. While he was still in a daze, a cavalry unit came over from the side. The leader was the 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng. As the two regiments were not far from each other, he had also noticed Su Keda's performance. Gong Feng was curious about this regiment commander who had fallen from the position of commander and had his own opinions. Gong Feng believed that Su Keda was only punished because he had done something wrong. He still had a bright future ahead of him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been demoted to a regiment commander but directly handed over to the disciplinary investigation department. Besides, this was the position of the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. In his opinion, the value of this position was no less than that of an ordinary division commander. In fact, it might even be better. Su Keda wouldn't lose out much by coming here. Unlike them, this person would leave this place soon. After all, someone who was chosen by the 6th young master to be the commander of an army must have extraordinary ability in commanding an army. Since that was the case, there were only benefits and no disadvantages to befriending this person. Regiment Commander Su, the battlefield should be pretty much cleaned up, right? Using the opportunity when the team walked past the 4th Regiment, Gong Feng casually spoke. "Oh, it's Regiment Commander Gong. Is your 5th Regiment done?" Seeing that it was Gong Feng who was speaking to him, Su Keda didn't dare to be negligent. He knew that other than himself, the other 4 regimental commanders were all very powerful. In terms of commanding ability, they weren't any worse than him. "It's done. You can also hurry up here. In fact, cleaning up the battlefield this time is relatively simple. The Mongol army from that day has already arrived. Let them take over. Our 1st Cavalry Division needs to show our might on the battlefield. There's no need to be serious about cleaning up the battlefield," Gong Feng said with his experience. Then he nodded at Su Keda and led the team away. Looking at Gong Feng's departing figure, Su Keda thanked him. Gong Feng had come to give him advice. It seems that he would have to learn how to adapt in the future. Of course, he knew that he wouldn't be here for too long. This could be seen from the attitude of Division Commander Tian Hu and the other regimental commanders towards him. They were very polite to him, to the point that they treated him as a guest and not one of their own. Su Keda naturally wouldn't think that he could integrate into the enemy's camp in such a short time. What he needed to do now was to use all the time he had to learn the strengths of the 1st Cavalry Division. One day, when he was leading an army by himself, he should have a big change and a better performance. After the Black Goat City was successfully broken through, the next target was Willow City. When the 4th Division of Lung Feng once again moved the cannons to the city gates, unexpectedly, they actually surrendered. The 12,000 Turkmen soldiers in the city all came out of the city and surrendered. Obviously, whether it was the Fire Province or the Black Goat City, they all knew that the strength of the 5-star army in front of them wasn't something that they could stop. Rather than losing their lives in the end, it was better to surrender now and at least keep one life. Following the capture of Willow City, in the entire east of Turkmenistan, other than the ruined city near the Hanhai Sea, there were no other Turkmen forces. Even this city only had 2,000 soldiers. Any one of them would be able to take it down. After dealing with the security threat in the east, Yang Chendong also needed to consider sending troops to Turkmenistan. It was time to completely destroy the Turkmenistan forces. He had this plan a long time ago. Once the various forces were in place, Yang Chendong would personally lead the troops out of Turkmenistan and begin his conquest of the Ili region. It was also at this time that the 250,000 troops of the Kazakh and Aries dynasty arrived in the Ili region. Their appearance increased the confidence of the 3 Turkmenistan countries to go against the 5-star army. After leaving Turpan, Yang Chendong decided to fight his first battle at Sabashi City, another large city in Turpan that was heading south. Based on the Intel Department's intel, there were 15,000 Turkmen soldiers in Sabashi City. They had already made preparations to defend the city. There was enough grain in the city, and there were huge rocks, logs, and kerosene on the city walls. They were just waiting for the 5-star army to arrive and teach them a lesson. The morale of an army depended on whether they won the battle or not. Let's put it this way, if they were defeated in a few battles, any army would face a situation where their morale was low. If there was even the slightest movement, it was very likely that they would collapse. Sabashi City was the first line of defense that Hardenbartle had left for the 5-star army. He did not even hope that the city could be defended. As long as he could delay for a period of time and make it difficult for the 5-star army, it would be considered a victory. This way, once winter arrived, the 5-star army would have no choice but to stop attacking. He wanted to see how long the 5-star army could stay here. In short, Hardenbartle was using the word, holding back. He would not take the initiative to fight the 5-star army. He wanted to use the cities one by one to slow down the 5-star army's advance. Once the 5-star army's main force dared to go around these cities, he would find a way to cut off the enemy's logistical supply and force the enemy to retreat. Unlike the new army and the other 3 armies, the 5-star army's original goal was not to attack cities. Therefore, once they encountered a city that was difficult to attack, they only needed to go around it. As for the problem of the army's food, they could fight while looting. This was what people often said about using war to support war. Although they were both part of the 5-star army, Yang Chendong's main force could not do this. His goal was to capture cities and seize large amounts of territory. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, the loss of Sabashi City could not be avoided. Yang Chendong did not think about going around it. With firearms and cannons that were hundreds of years ahead of this era, why would he want to go around it? Sieging a city? This should be his favorite mode of war. Send down the order. The 4th Lu Division will be the vanguard, the Liaodong Division will be the left, and the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division will be the right. After the 4th Lu Division breaks through the gates of Sabashi City, the left and right cavalry will enter the city together. Those who surrender will live, those who resist will die. After the order was sent down, close to 30,000 5-star army moved out, leaving Yang Chendong's main force and surging forward. Yang Chendong, who was very confident in this battle, called over General Narasong of the Mongol Alliance Army and said, "Go and arrange for the people who are preparing to migrate to enter the city. Also, move all the people who should be migrating out. If there are people who are unwilling to leave their homes, forcefully take them away. If they resist, kill without mercy. Those who are not of my race will definitely have different intentions." Yang Chendong never had much patience for other factions and races. It was best if they agreed to surrender. As long as they listened to him, he did not mind giving them a better living environment. On the other hand, if they did not want to give him face, he would kill them all. He wanted to let others know that Bugnam of Gojoseon's temper was not so good. With the order given, the 5-star army quickly got busy. Following behind the main force, the Land Reform Committee also sent out a small team to follow the people who were preparing to move to Sabashi City. Yang Chendong's time was limited, and he would not waste too much time in Ili. He wanted to solve the problem here as quickly as possible. Previously, when the new army passed by this place, they chose to go around it. This made the Turpan soldiers heave a sigh of relief. This time, when they saw another batch of 5-star army appear here, they knew that it would be hard to avoid this battle. However, under the orders of the defending general, they were prepared for battle. At the same time, smoke signals were lit up on the city walls, sending out warning signals. Chapter 1290. The current situation of the Turpan army was extremely bad, to the point of being somewhat miserable. In their own territory, they couldn't even communicate with each other. The only way to contact each other was to use smoke signals to determine whether they were in danger or not. This naturally had a lot to do with the fact that the new army was attacking everywhere. They did not focus on attacking cities, but rather on reducing the enemy's strength. The new Third Army had regiments and even battalions as units. Once they found a Turpan army, they would appear from all directions to surround and annihilate them. As time passed, the Turpan army could only hole up in their cities, not daring to take half a step out. They did not even dare to leave their cities, nor did they have the communication devices of the five-star army. Right now, they were like fat lambs in a pen, waiting to be slaughtered. As the smoke signals rose, the city walls of Sabashi were filled with Turpan soldiers. They had even learned from the five-star army's experience in defending Turpan, gathering the civilians who had not fled. They wanted to borrow the strength of the civilians to defend the city. However, unlike the five-star army, they did not provide any benefits to the civilians. They were completely using the situation of grabbing able-bodied men to chase the civilians to the city walls. This method of using the civilians as cannon fodder naturally attracted the curses of the civilians. Tuashuan City wasn't a small city. It could be considered one of the most important cities in the Turpan Kingdom. However, because it was too close to the main force of the five-star army, the Turpan soldiers had long fled. There were no civilians left in the city. The moment the five-star army arrived, they were able to move in smoothly. The largest mansion in the city also became Yang Chendong's temporary resting place. Before the residence could be completely cleaned up, the battle report from the front lines was sent over by Wang Shan. When Yang Chendong saw the contents of 4th Master Lu's report, he couldn't help but laugh heartily. His face was filled with joy as he said, "This is really like the saying, if you don't seek death, you won't die." The Turpan soldiers are forcing the civilians like this. How can they still have the hearts of the people? Once the hearts of the people turn against us, we can save a lot of trouble by occupying this place. Beta Persei at the side also saw the telegram and nodded in agreement. That's right, it seems that the Turpan army does not treat the civilians as humans at all. This will cause the civilians to riot. They are shooting themselves in the foot. After saying this, Beta Persei had a worried look on his face. He continued, "There are so many civilians on the city walls, are we still going to continue running?" "Of course." Yang Chendong said with an extremely confident tone, "Right now, the civilians are not our civilians, we have no obligation to ensure their safety. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame themselves for following the wrong master. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame themselves for not escaping from Supa City in time. Send an order, Division Commander De Chong, tell him not to have any misgivings and to proceed with the original plan. In doing so, the lives of some civilians would naturally be sacrificed, but this was not in Yang Chendong's eyes. If it had to be said, he was a staunch nationalist. If the people standing on the city walls were Han civilians, he would definitely refrain from shooting at the rat for fear of breaking the vases. This was also the reason why Yang Xie did not directly declare war on Baiming and Nanming even though he was so powerful. However, there was no need to be polite to the foreigners. The deaths of these civilians would be blamed on the Turpan government. After the unexpected situation occurred, Division Commander De Chong had no choice but to report it, but he did not stop the work at hand. The muzzles of the cannons that should be adjusted were already in place. With his understanding of the 6th young master, just these foreigners alone would not be able to stop the five-star army's determination to occupy this place. As expected, the order to attack according to the original plan was sent to him. Immediately, Division Commander De Chong did not hold back. He raised the red flag high and roared, "Fire!" Boom, boom, boom. In just the first round of bombardment, out of the 6 cannonballs, 2 cannonballs accurately landed on the northern city gate. The tall city gate that normally required at least 4 people to close began to tremble as if it would break open at any moment. Second round of cannons, continue. Division Commander De Chong lowered the red flag in his hand again. Immediately, another round of cannons was fired, causing the ground to tremble again. On the city walls of Suba, the cannons suddenly fell. This caused the Turpan civilians, who were originally unwilling to go up the city walls, to have a drastic change in expression. The cowardly ones had already wet their pants and sat down on the ground. Their legs were trembling, and they had no strength to stand up. Most of the civilians were like this because they had never seen such powerful cannons before. In their eyes, firecrackers were not something they could come into contact with frequently, let alone cannons that were 10,000 times more powerful. In contrast, the Turpan soldiers guarding the city were also frightened. They were not mentally prepared in this regard. When the cannons fell, especially when one of the cannons landed among them, it immediately caused dozens of casualties. Looking at the broken limbs everywhere, and the smell of blood directly assaulted their nostrils. The soldiers were all trembling, and their hands that were holding swords became weak. At this point, how could they still have the time to monitor the civilians' performance? The series of cannons completely disrupted the Turpan army's plan, and also caused their already low morale to drop to a freezing point. When another 6 cannons were fired, one of them destroyed the north gate of Suba. The Liaodong Cavalry Division and the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed in through the gate. When the battle cries rang out in all directions, the soldiers' last line of defense completely collapsed. At this moment, most of them did not fight with their weapons. Instead, they threw down the weapons in their hands and turned to flee. This was not a battle strategy of this era, and it caused their confidence to be completely destroyed. In their hearts, an indelible thought was formed: the 5-star army was not human and could not be defeated. The 2 divisions of cavalry smoothly entered Subashi city from the north gate. The cannons also stopped firing, but the chaos in the city did not stop. They did not expect the 5-star army to arrive in front of them so quickly, and the Turpan soldiers in the city did not make any preparations. As a result, the 5-star army cavalry charged in all directions, and unless they threw down their weapons and surrendered, they were all killed by the brave 5-star army cavalry soldiers. There was almost no resistance, and Suba was conquered by the 5-star army. They captured and injured over 10,000 enemies, and saved over 30,000 civilians. From the start of the cannons to the end, it only took 6 hours. When the news of victory reached Yang Chendong, he waved his arms and said excitedly, "There is no need to pack up anymore. We will set off now and head to Suba. At the same time, we will inform the 4th Division and the rest of the front line to continue forward. Our next target is Kunlui City." Under the lead of Commander Bai Shuang, the First Army understood more about the situation in the Ili region through Slam. After discussing with the 4 division commanders, they finally gave up on Dayu City and chose to charge towards Nalatu City. Under the meticulous planning, Slam introduced the grain merchants to Nalatu City. Under the same method, they took another city without any bloodshed. It could be said that their progress was extremely fast. When they were about to take the city of Telhala, the news finally leaked out. After all, this was already within the borders of the Ili Empire. Their spies were everywhere, and it was impossible for the 30,000-strong First Army of the Outsiders to remain completely silent. The city gates of Telhala in front of them suddenly closed, the city towers filled with soldiers. When the news reached Bai Shuangji's ears, he immediately made the decision to bring the army and the provisions he plundered from the 2 cities to attack. Just when everyone thought that a siege was about to break out, the First Army of the Outsiders actually took a detour around the city, leaving Telhala behind. They charged straight for the capital of Ili Empire from outside the city. The 5-star army actually appeared in his own territory, and so close to the capital. When King Bao Lide heard the news, he was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. He quickly called the Prime Minister Apu to discuss countermeasures. "Prime Minister, the 5-star army actually appeared. This is all thanks to you." When Bao Lide saw Apu, he held his hand tightly and spoke with a grateful expression on his face. Before, Apu had suggested that the 5-star army didn't play by the rules when they fought. In order to prevent sneak attacks and sudden invasions, they should send out more scouts to keep an eye on the surrounding areas. Bao Lide didn't agree with this request from the bottom of his heart. He didn't think it was necessary. No matter how powerful the 5-star army was, wasn't there a heavenly mountain between them? Even if the army could come over, they wouldn't be able to transport the grain. Moreover, the 5-star army still had the Turpan kingdom to deal with. What he should do now was to do his best to solve the problem in front of him, and not go around looking for trouble with them. If this wasn't Prime Minister Apu's suggestion, King Bao Lide would have directly refused. He didn't want to hurt the Prime Minister's feelings, so he reluctantly agreed and let the Prime Minister do as he saw fit. What he didn't expect was that it was all thanks to the scouts that he sent out. Otherwise, even if the 5-star army was at his doorstep, he wouldn't know anything. Apu's expression was very heavy. He didn't look happy at all because he discovered the five-star army ahead of time. In fact, this couldn't be considered as discovering the enemy ahead of time. They had already lost Little Yule City and Nalatu City. Their reaction was already half a beat too slow. Your Majesty, I've already received the news. The five-star army really did come from Heavenly Mountain. They didn't bring a large amount of grain, they just attacked the city and looted it. Chapter 1291. What? How can they be so bold? King Baolida's already gloomy face became even more gloomy. He didn't say anything for a long time. Yes, their guts are too big. Why don't we just eat them? Prime Minister Ali Pu hesitated for a moment before speaking with a solemn expression. Eat them up? Wouldn't that make us enemies with the five-star army? King Baolida frowned. It was a pity that he was still hoping for a peaceful solution at a time like this. This was the sorrow of the weak. It was just like when the Japanese invaded China. Even though they knew that the enemy had ill intentions, they still restrained themselves. They only realized their mistake when they lost a large portion of their territory. The weak did not have any initiative on the battlefield. They were at the mercy of the enemy. Seeing that the king was still hesitating, Apu sighed and said, Your Majesty, we can't wait any longer. The five-star army did not even give us a heads up before attacking us. If we don't send an army to surround them, I'm afraid that once the enemy's main force arrives, we won't be able to retaliate. We still need to think about it at length. How about this? We will only send people to block them. At the same time, we will order the cities to prepare their defenses and observe the situation. King Baolida was still hoping that the five-star legion would be at a disadvantage on the main battlefield, and they would be stopped by the Turpan Kingdom's army. If this was the case, perhaps they wouldn't even need to make a move. The five-star army would have to withdraw from this place. In this way, they would be able to obtain victory without shedding a drop of blood on their blades. Once the five-star army retreated, they would not lose any strength. Wouldn't that be the best time to take over the Turpan and Yarkiang territories? At this moment, King Baoli was still dreaming of unifying the entire region. It was, as the saying goes, a fool's dream. Apu naturally did not agree with King Baoli's words. However, he was a subject and the other party was the king. Since that was the case, he could only obey. All right, then order the cities to defend first. Let's observe the situation first. There was one more thing that Apu didn't say. Once the ambitions of the five-star army were exposed, the king would have no choice but to send troops to suppress them. After the two of them had a detailed discussion, the king of Baoli issued a number of orders to the generals of the major cities in Ili, telling them to exercise restraint and pay close attention to the five-star army's movements. At the same time, they were to guard their own cities well. If it wasn't necessary, they were to not engage the five-star army in a direct confrontation. King Baolida was satisfied. He believed that as long as he didn't provoke the other party, the five-star army would leave if they couldn't take down the city. At the very least, his losses wouldn't be too great. On the other hand, Arap was unwilling to leave. He could clearly see how ambitious the five-star army was. Their strength was not something a small country like Turpan could satisfy. Right now, the most important thing to do was to unite and fight against the enemy together, and not watch each other make fools of themselves and be defeated one by one. I can only persuade His Majesty next time. Let's go back. After leaving the palace, Arap sat in a sedan and headed back to the Prime Minister's residence under the protection of 20 guards. What he didn't know was that after he left this time, when he returned to this place, everything had changed. Just as Arap and his men left the palace, several pairs of eyes stared at them from a dark corner. Soon, a very small voice sounded out. The target has left the palace and is heading back to his own residence. Tell everyone to be prepared. The journey from the royal palace to the Prime Minister's residence was about 6 li. Along the way, they had to pass through a rather remote street. Here, this street was filled with dozens of black shadows. All of them only had one goal, and that was the slowly approaching palanquin. Arap sat in the sedan with his eyes closed and a worried expression on his face. The king's reaction and point of view were very different from his, and this made him very vexed. He had always believed that he was the enemy. When facing the ambitious 5-star army, it was fine if he didn't make a move, but if he did, he had to make sure that he hit the enemy with a heavy blow. Only then could he make the enemy feel pain and retreat. Although doing this might lead to the retaliation of the 5-star army, if he didn't do this, would they let him off so easily? The 5-star army's strategic intentions were very clear. They had set their sights on this piece of land and wanted to occupy it. This created an irreconcilable conflict between the two sides. Since this was the case, what difference did it make if they started the war a day earlier or a day later? If they didn't take advantage of the fact that the enemy had yet to gain a firm foothold and missed this opportunity, they might not have another chance like this in the future. No, I have to persuade His Majesty in the future that he can't be soft on the 5-star army. The enemy only has 30,000 cavalry. As long as he plans well, with the geographical advantage, it won't be difficult to mobilize 100,000 cavalry. At that time, with an absolute advantage in numbers, victory will be within reach. As he muttered to himself, several military plans began to take shape in Apol's mind. Clang, clang. The palanquin suddenly fell to the ground without any warning. Aleppo, who was deep in thought, lost his balance and nearly fell out of the palanquin. The sudden change caused his expression to change. He immediately shouted angrily, "What's going on?" Although Apol's temperament was good and he took good care of the people around him, anyone would be angry after being tossed around like this. He was also an exception. After shouting angrily, he wanted to lift the palanquin to check. But before he could do anything, the palanquin's curtains opened from the outside, and a very unfamiliar face appeared. After carefully sizing up the shocked Apu, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "That's right. We can verify his identity now. Take him away." What did he mean by verifying his identity? Apol didn't quite understand, but he knew it wasn't anything good. When he thought of the fact that he was in the middle of the city and there should be soldiers patrolling around, he wanted to shout loudly to attract more people. But his actions were already under the eyes of the stranger. He saw an arm coming at him through the air, then his neck stiffened. His body fell to the side and he lost consciousness. Just like that, Prime Minister Apol was taken away. More than an hour later, a group of patrolling soldiers passed by and saw the sedan. After confirming that it belonged to the Prime Minister, they immediately sent people to investigate. It didn't take long for the news of Prime Minister Apol's disappearance to reach the palace. Soon, King Baolide's shouts could be heard. "Find him! Find him even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground." These shouts caused the generals who came to report to tremble and complain inwardly. But if they knew that Apol had already been sent out of the capital by the intelligence department, they wouldn't be complaining, they would be crying for help. Soon, the news reached the ears of Yang Chendong, who was on his way to Kunlo City. His expression didn't change, and he said in a thick voice, "Understood, tell Chuisho to protect Apol's safety, this person is very useful." This matter was arranged by Yang Chendong. To be able to become a famous prime minister, there are many records in history. Such a person, Yang Chendong has a lot of scruples in his heart. Of course, he wouldn't underestimate such an opponent, so he sent Chuisho to lead ninjas to carry out the kidnapping plan. The operation code was called Needle Extraction. Sure enough, they didn't disappoint. The ninjas who dared to fully submit to the Prime Minister were able to do such a thing without anyone noticing. After contacting the local situation team, they quickly made a targeted plan. A burst of poisonous smoke was scattered, and the whole operation didn't cause any commotion. Without Apol's protection, it was like a bird that lost a wing. The threat it posed was greatly reduced. This also created more opportunities for Bai Shuang's First Army's military plan. For example, after receiving the king's order, the cities of the Yili Empire were all in a state of self-defense. Their gates were tightly closed, and they looked like they were on the verge of death. But what they didn't know was that Shuang Bai never intended to attack a city. Even when he took over Little Yule City, it was only to replenish his food supplies. Their main task was to cause destruction, to disrupt the social order of the Yili Empire, and to attack their strength. Some large cities have the help of their gates, which can be closed for defense. But some villages and towns can't, and these places became the targets of the first army. They rode fast horses and rushed into the houses of large families, but whenever they encountered resistance, they would kill without mercy. After creating one bloody case after another, they would even open the granaries of the rich families. Apart from taking away some of the things that they needed, they would leave the rest untouched, allowing the wind to blow on them, allowing the sun to shine on them, and allowing the ordinary people around to spy on them. At first, the commoners were afraid of the power of these large families, so they didn't dare act rashly. But 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and some of the more daring people entered the manor. When they saw the ground covered in corpses, the fear in their hearts disappeared, and the piles of food that had already been opened up were quickly snatched clean by these people. This happened once, and when this happened frequently and the large family's food was exposed to the commoners again and again, they no longer hesitated, nor would they wait for a day or two. They only needed to see the 5-star Army's cavalry leave, and then they would take action to snatch. The news that they could fill their stomachs quickly spread like the wind, to the extent that in some places, before the 5-star Army appeared, some of the more daring commoners gathered together and charged into the large families, killing people and giving out food, and in the end, shifting the blame to the 5-star Army. Chapter 1292. To be able to store so much food at home in a year of famine, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was rich and heartless. If such a person died, then so be it, there was nothing to feel pity about. As for shifting the blame to the 5-star Army, Bai Shuang didn't really care. These people's actions had indirectly helped him, expanding the reputation of the 5-star Army, so why not? Bai Shuang clearly remembered that his teacher Yang Chendong had said more than once that the existence of social class was the greatest restriction to the 5-star Army and Yangxia. This was especially true for some of the nobles. Although the dynasties changed frequently, they would never fall. People like this who only cared about their own interests and had no loyalty to the current dynasty would often become new meritorious officials of a new dynasty. There was nothing wrong with killing such people who had no ruler, no country, and no father. Only by killing all of these people would the 5-star Army have a better chance of conquering and controlling the land. Not only that, if they did it well, they would gain the support of the commoners. In comparison, the commoners were the ones who suffered the most. They had been oppressed by these nobles for who knew how many years. Some of them had been oppressed since their ancestors, so it was impossible for them to not be angry. The only reason why they didn't say anything was because they were too cowardly and didn't have enough strength. Since it was like this, the 5-star Army could help them and be the leader. Reality proved that this was indeed quite effective. This was because in many places, especially the commoners who had been oppressed by the nobles, began to look forward to the arrival of the 5-star Army. Some of the more far-sighted ones had already brought their travel expenses with them to find the 5-star Army and join them. Their many years of life experience told them that only the 5-star Army could save them. Only the 5-star Army could help them change their lives. Bai Shuang fully understood his teacher Yang Chendong's philosophy and did as he was told. The result was that not only did the strength of the foreign race's first army not decrease, it was instead continuously expanding. As for the young and strong civilians who wanted to join the army, he accepted them all and organized them into the 4 divisions under his command. With the presence of these people, they would be more familiar with and understand the surrounding environment. Some of the following military battle plans would also be better supplemented and perfected. The effect was so good that Yang Chendong had never thought of it before. Compared to the first army, the progress of the new 5 armies was also very smooth. Even though they didn't recruit the local commoners as soldiers, because there was a RAF who understood the Yirkiang tribe extremely well, this captured general completely stood on the side of the 5-star Army. Based on his understanding of the Yirkiang tribe, the new 5-star Army could often achieve twice the results with half the effort. Their entry also gave King Agudemu a huge headache. Unlike King Baalide, the Yarkiang's King Agudemu chose to fight head-on. He had sent out 100,000 cavalrymen to search for the main force of the new 5-star Army, and wanted to have a decisive battle with them. In his mind, this was his territory, and he had the advantage in terms of timing, location, and manpower. He also had a huge advantage in terms of military strength. Why couldn't he deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army and win a huge victory? However, how could Commander Shi Wanshan, who fully followed Yang Chendong's orders, do as he wished? He was originally a general of the Great Ming Dynasty and had a deep understanding of Sun Tzu's art of war. Based on Araf's introduction of the situation, he and his opponent started to engage in guerrilla warfare. For a moment, both sides were fighting back and forth, and neither side had a clear winner. Compared to the first army and the new 5-star army, the new army led by Su, he quickly encountered a huge nail. He continuously bypassed many important cities and arrived at the Iron Gate Pass to attack the rear of the Turkopan kingdom. At that moment, 100,000 cavalrymen were rushing towards their location. They were the reinforcements sent by the Kazakh Empire to support the three countries. The general leading them was still Janibek Khan's younger brother, Kelei. Last time, he had brought 80,000 soldiers and lost 30,000 of them. This made him feel extremely ashamed. This time, when he set out for the second time, he had already made a decision. He had also fully absorbed the experience of the previous battle. He wanted to lead the army alone. Kelei had always believed that his previous defeat wasn't because he was inferior to the 5-star army, but because his allies weren't strong enough. As the saying goes, don't fear a godlike opponent, but fear a pig-like opponent. This was what he thought. This time, he didn't inform anyone that he was leading an army of 100,000. He also didn't have any intention of joining forces with any country. Apart from contacting them when he needed provisions, he spent the rest of his time traveling alone. He wanted to find the main force of the 5-star army and have a decisive battle with them. The heavens seemed to know what he was thinking and gave him a chance. When he learned from the scouts that there was a 30,000-strong 5-star army just 150 li away from them, he became extremely excited. Good, very good. Pass down the order for the army to speed up. We must surround the 30,000 5-star army. When moving behind the enemy lines without enough information, it was easy to fall into danger. He felt a great amount of pressure. The number of scouts he sent out was sufficient, and the distance they covered was far enough. This was the reason why he didn't lose. With the existence of these excellent scouts, the moment the 100,000 Kazakh Empire troops appeared 100 li away, the news was sent back. When he learned that the enemy had 100,000 cavalrymen, the first thing he did wasn't to run away, but to calm down and consider whether or not he could take down these 100,000 soldiers. 30,000 against 100,000, and he still wanted to take down the enemy. This was no different from a snake trying to swallow an elephant. In the eyes of others, this was overestimating one's capabilities. However, in the eyes of he and his new army, this really wasn't an impossible task. It was because of the three armies sent to attack the enemy's rear. His new army was the closest to Yang Chendong's main force, as well as the one with the highest chance of receiving assistance in the shortest amount of time. Send a report to the 6th young master, tell him about the situation here, tell him about our plans to take down the enemy and our battle plan. After just a stick of incense's time, he made his decision. He wanted to create a miracle. The messenger quickly left after receiving the order. He then said to the 4 division commanders at his side, "Inform the soldiers to rest here. We need to recover our strength in preparation for the great battle." When he saw how confident he was, the 4th Cavalry Division's commander Chang Bo couldn't help but feel worried. "Military commander, will the king agree to our request?" These words attracted the attention of the other 3 division commanders. It was clear that this was also a question they were concerned about. However, Suhi's expression didn't seem to care as he said, "If the 6th young master agrees, then we'll fight this battle well. If he doesn't agree, then we'll retreat. It's just a moment of rest." Suhi's meaning was extremely clear. He wasn't sure if Yang Chendong would agree, so he made 2 preparations. Would Yang Chendong agree? When the telegram was sent, he didn't immediately give an answer. Instead, he stared at the telegram for a long time. The Kazakh Empire and the Aries dynasty had sent a total of 250,000 cavalrymen to aid the Middle Kingdom. He had already received the news from the intelligence department. Yang Chendong welcomed their troops because it gave him an excuse to invade the two countries. Just like when he entered the Ili region, didn't he also say that he wanted to take revenge? Even though the matter of Ili sending troops had happened a long time ago, this excuse was a bit forced. But even if it was an excuse, who cared if it was prudent or not? And now, these two countries had given him a legitimate reason. Of course, it couldn't be any better. However, it was still 250,000 cavalrymen after all. How could it be so easy to deal with them? Yang Chendong did not have enough preparation to deal with them, nor did he know what kind of environment and conditions to fight them. On the battlefield, opportunities were constantly changing. Many sudden events didn't give you time to prepare. Now the opportunity had come. The new army wanted to fight 100,000 Kazakh cavalry. What he had to do was agree or disagree. If he agreed, then it was just a question of who to send as reinforcements. Yang Chendong wasn't so arrogant as to think that the new army could stop 100,000 Kazakh cavalry with only 30,000 people. But what if he sent some reinforcements? Come, call Tian Hu and Ling Daqiang over. On the battlefield, the 1st Cavalry Division had no place to be used. They were only brought along to guard against sudden events. Now that the opportunity had appeared, it couldn't be better to send this army. As for the 4th Infantry Division, when sieging the city, they didn't need a division's strength. 1 regiment was enough. The remaining 3 regiments could also be sent to support the new army. In this way, even though their military strength wasn't as good as the enemy's in terms of military strength, it wasn't wrong to say that they surpassed the enemy's. In particular, the 3 regiments of the Cold Front were fully equipped with firearms. Once they were sent out, they would definitely have an unexpected effect. Arriving in front of the sand table, after a serious and careful search, Yang Chendong determined the battlefield. He waved his right hand and smashed the sand table at the location of Batian Mound. His eyes flashed with an intimidating light. Batian Mound was located on the west side of Boston Lake. On both sides of the lake were tall mountains. It stretched for more than 20 kilometers and was a good place to set up an ambush. Choosing the battlefield here could achieve the effect of heavily injuring the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry. At that time, they could use the method of blocking the head, cutting the waist, and cutting the tail to maximize the results of the battle and establish the 5-star army's chances of victory. In order to achieve the best results, Yang Chendong decided to personally lead the troops into battle. The battle involved the 4th Infantry Division, the entire World Cavalry Division, and the entire new army. In order to fully display the advantages of these units and ensure that they cooperated well, Yang Chendong had to personally lead them. Very quickly, Tian Hu and Ling Daqiang came in front of Yang Chendong and told him his thoughts. As for the ambush location and the ambush of the Kazakh army, both Tian Hu and Ling Daqiang had no objections. They were clear that once the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry entered the battlefield, it could disrupt the military plans of the army and cause a lot of trouble. However, to achieve the effect of this ambush, and for the military plans to be completed smoothly, there was another point that couldn't be ignored. That was whether or not the Turpan army would send out their troops. Chapter 1293. If the Turpan army were to send troops to assist the Kazakh army, or to help them intercept the Kazakh army, then what they would have to face would not only be 100,000 enemy cavalry, but even more. If that was the case, whether or not they could smoothly win this battle would be full of suspense. When the 2 division commanders raised their concerns, Yang Chendong confidently waved his hand. No, that won't happen. Kelly is a very conceited person. Last time, he lost to us, so he won't accept it. This time, he has the opportunity to fight with us alone, so he won't lightly ask for help from the Turpan army. Besides, unless it is necessary, he won't be willing to share such a big merit with others. You can rest assured about this. Of course, if the battle doesn't reach a state where we can kill them in one blow, then no one knows what will happen. This requires us to appear outside the ambush area on time. As long as we can do this and trap the enemy in Tianbo Mound, then even if they ask for help, it will be too late. Yang Chendong deeply understood the principle of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy to be victorious in 100 battles. Often, when facing an army, the attitude of the enemy's general would determine the final direction of the battle. It could be said that he had studied Kelly thoroughly, which was why he could say these words so confidently. Seeing the sixth young master so confident, Tianhu and Ling Daqiang looked at each other and nodded. In their view, even if there was an accident in the battle and Kelly asked for help from the Turpan army, with their ability, they could just retreat. Would they really be surrounded? After the three of them discussed for a while, they came up with a final strategy. Then, the two generals left the tent to count the troops. Yang Chendong also called Beta Persei and asked him to gather 2,000 black cavalry to prepare to fight with the 4th Division. At the same time, he also asked Wang Shan to send a telegram to the new army commander Su He, ordering him to lure the enemy in and lead the Kazakh cavalry into Tian Bo Mound and into the ambush area. With a single order, the army began to get busy. In order to not alert the enemy, Yang Chendong ordered the remaining troops to continue towards Kuanlai city and attack the city according to the plan to attract the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, he himself led the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards and the main force of the 4th Division to leave the official road and head towards Bo Tian Mound. The location of the ambush had been determined, and the next thing to do was to reach the location within the specified time. This would determine the success or failure of this battle. Therefore, after leaving the official road, Yang Chendong and the Black Cavalry rode fast horses and galloped with the main force of the 4th Division. In order to reach their destination on time, the soldiers of the 4th Army Division traveled light. They didn't bring anything they didn't need to ensure their speed. It was the same for the Black Knights and Dragon Guards. Each of them was given 3 strong horses. After a while, they would change horses to ensure that they maintained the same speed as they reached their destination. At the same time, the new army commander Su He received the order. After seeing Yang Chendong's telegram, he called the 4 division commanders over. First, he found the location of Tian Bo Mound on the sand table and then read out the military order. Everyone this time, the 6th young master will personally lead the troops into battle. Our new army's opportunity to show off has come. Now, I announce that the task of luring the enemy will be handed over to Su. He didn't immediately make a decision. Instead, he looked at the 4 division commanders one by one. Feeling Su He's gaze, the 4 division commanders tried their best to raise their heads, showing their determination to fight. The task will be handed over to the 1st Cavalry Division. Division Commander Ku, is there a problem? In the end, his gaze fell on Division Commander Bai Kai. The 4 division commanders of the new army were all brave and fierce. On the battlefield, they were all experts on horseback, but at the same time, they all had their own specialties. But in terms of commanding ability, Ku Lu, who almost became a division commander, was better. This person was good at coordinating the overall situation, especially when it came to defense. Giving this task to him was the most reassuring. Ku Lu's body tensed up when his name was called. He knew that this was the division commander's way of giving him a chance to perform. Previously, because he helped the 1st Army's former division commander, Su Kudu, hide military intelligence, he was given a warning, and because of that, he lost the chance to become a division commander. Now that the opportunity had appeared in front of him again, he immediately replied loudly, "Yes, I promise to complete the task." It's good to have confidence, but this time, you're using a division to lure 100,000 soldiers. In order to not let them see anything, the other 3 divisions must retreat and not give you any help. It can be said that the success or failure of this battle will all depend on you. Do you understand the importance of this task? After all, this was not a small matter. It involved the victory or defeat of nearly 200,000 soldiers. Su He had no choice but to remind Ku Lu. This subordinate understands. Division Commander, please rest assured. If this task is not completed, I will bring my head to see you. Ku Lu naturally knew the difficulty of this task, but he was not afraid. He believed in the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division. He also believed that as long as the preparations were done well, the task would definitely be completed. Good. What he needed was Ku Lu's determination. Su He nodded with satisfaction. Then he ordered the other 3 divisions to raise their flags and pretend to retreat in a sorry state. Of course, this was to let the Kazakh cavalry see. This was also the only thing he could do for Kulu's 1st Cavalry Division. After that, the 3 divisions of the new army's main force ran away. In order to make it seem more realistic, he ordered the troops to throw away some of their equipment after a certain distance. This made it seem like they were retreating in a hurry and fleeing in a sorry state. Only by doing this could they lure the enemy's army into an ambush circle. This action of the new army was quickly discovered by the Kazakh cavalry scouts. One by one, they reported it to General Kalii, causing him to laugh uncontrollably. Good, it seems like our sudden appearance has indeed caught the 5-star army off guard. Very good, order the army to speed up and catch up to the 5-star army. Then we'll eat them up. After Kalii returned to Kazakh after his defeat, although his brother Janibek Khan did not blame him, he still felt very uncomfortable in his heart. Especially the unwillingness in his heart. From the beginning to the end, he did not have a chance to properly fight with the 5-star army. This made him feel even more unjust. If it was a fair battle and he lost, then there was nothing to say. However, losing to an ally was something that he could not accept. This time, he brought another 100,000 troops to battle. He had thought it through and decided that he must have a fair battle with the 5-star army. He wanted to let the enemy know the power of the Kazakh cavalry. Kalii happily gave the order. His deputy, who was personally placed in the army by Janibek Khan, narrowed his eyes and stepped out. General, should we send a message to the king of Turpan and ask him to cooperate with us to block the 5-star army's escape route? HM? Hearing this suggestion, Kalii did not immediately reply. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Of course, he knew that blocking the 2 sides was much more effective than chasing after them alone. However, deep in his bones, he did not trust these allies. He did not want to share this great merit with others. If the Turpan army appeared and blocked the 5-star army's escape route, then he would be very unwilling to share the merit with others. After thinking about it again and again, he decided to give it a try. If it really did not work, then he would send someone to inform the Turpan army. Furthermore, he had 100,000 soldiers and the enemy only had 30,000 cavalry. No matter how he looked at it, there was no possibility of him losing. Kalii was just like Yang Chendong. He did not inform the Turpan army of the situation. This was also his fate. This would also become the most regretful thing in his life. After making up his mind, Kalii ordered General Porta to be the vanguard and move quickly. The order he gave was to quickly chase after the escaping 5-star army and viciously bite their tails. It would be best if they could tangle with them and create enough time and opportunity for the main force to arrive and form an encirclement. Porta was also a famous general in Kazakh. After receiving the order, he immediately ordered 10,000 cavalrymen and 3 days' worth of rations to leave the barracks and run in the direction of the new army's escape route. To be appointed as the vanguard general, Porta was very ambitious. He wanted to achieve the greatest merit to prove his ability. However, this raging fire was quickly extinguished. Just as he was about to reach a valley after forcefully marching for 100 miles, countless arrows suddenly flew out from both sides of the road. His vanguard of 1,000 cavalrymen quickly suffered heavy losses. In the end, only 200 to 300 of them managed to escape. They had a bad start. When Porta heard the news, he was very angry. He angrily scolded the vanguard general for being incompetent and cowardly. Then he personally led 3,000 cavalrymen to the front. As expected, as soon as they arrived, they were attacked by arrows. However, Porta was prepared and quickly launched a counterattack. He ordered his cavalrymen to split into 2 groups and rush to the high ground on both sides. Under Porta's command, the 3,000 cavalrymen rushed through the waves of arrows and rushed to the top of the valley, which was more than 20 meters high. The 2,000 5-star army that were lying in ambush here kept retreating. Many bows and quivers were thrown all over the ground, and the few war horses were abandoned as well. Haha. Seeing the result of this battle and the 5-star soldiers rushing into the dense forest in the distance, Boda threw his head back and laughed heartily to release the joy in his heart. However, he did not notice that although they had captured a lot, they did not leave behind a single 5-star army soldier. However, at this moment he was completely enjoying the feeling of victory. Everything else had already been thrown to the back of his mind. Do you see that? This is the powerful 5-star army that people have been talking about. Come on, let's continue forward. Porta was happy and the vanguard continued to move forward. Chapter 1294. After another 5 kilometers, another wave of arrows arrived. But this time, the Kazakh cavalry were prepared and did not panic. Other than a few dozen who were injured by the first wave of arrows, the rest of the cavalry quickly rushed up the canyon and chased away the 5-star army. After 2 consecutive victories, the Kazakh army's morale was greatly boosted and their speed seemed to have increased a lot. However, after 5 kilometers, another wave of arrows came, forcing them to slow down their pace. Because of this, there were a total of 5 waves of arrows by the time the sky turned dark. The distance of the attacks had also changed from once every 10 miles to once every 5 miles. Fortunately, this kind of attack did not cause too much damage to the Kazakh vanguard. The total number of Kazakh cavalry was less than 1,000. This was also because they lost 600 to 700 cavalry in the first wave. Considering that it was dark and difficult to see, Boda had to order the army to stop and rest in order to avoid falling into the enemy's trap. Boda, who was lying in the temporary tent, had a face full of excitement. Today, he had repelled 5 waves of attacks from the 5-star army and obtained 2,000 sets of bows. This was an amazing achievement. With such a satisfied smile on her face, the Bustu woman slept all the way until dawn. What made him feel a little regretful was that the 5-star army did not come to harass him that night. This made the 4,000 cavalry that he had hidden outside the camp not come in handy, which was somewhat disappointing. But did this mean that the 5-star army did not have the ability to ambush him and that they had already left? General Boda, who possessed the spirit of Akyu, gave the order to advance at full speed after breakfast. After walking for a full 20 miles, they did not encounter any harassment or attacks. This made Boda even more certain that the 5 astral legions had escaped. Now, he could finally let go of his hands and feet and advance at full speed. Not long after his order was issued, the army's formation began to scatter after advancing for more than 3 kilometers. The arrow attacks that had disappeared for a while appeared again. The attacks from the bows and arrows in the dense forest were even more intense than before. In just one wave of attacks, over 100 riders were hit by the arrows. Cries of pain and curses rose and fell one after another. The sudden counterattack was completely unexpected, and the Kazakh cavalry who had already lowered their vigilance suffered a great loss. What was even more frightening was that after the 2 waves of arrows were fired, the 5-star army still charged forward, brandishing their sabers as they charged into the enemy's ranks. Immediately, streams of blood splattered out, dyeing the 5-star army's armor red. Don't panic, counterattack, counterattack. Seeing soldiers falling off their horses, Boda roared and led the cavalry around him in a counterattack. However, the 5-star army's cavalry came quickly and left even faster. They didn't give Porta a chance to counterattack and disappeared into the dense forest on both sides. By the time Sark's army arrived, they had already disappeared. This was clearly a premeditated attack. With the mentality of running after one shot, they came and went without a trace. After they left, General Boda sadly discovered that in just half an hour, he had lost over 1,000 cavalrymen, and the number of injured soldiers had increased by nearly 1,000. This kind of loss was a huge blow to General Boda. They hadn't even engaged the enemy yet, but they had already lost nearly 30% of their strength. This made him have no choice but to be vigilant and send as many scouts as possible into the dense forest to ensure the safety of the vanguard. The advantage of doing this was that the possibility of a surprise attack was very small, but because of this, the marching speed of the army had to be slowed down. 15 miles away, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, Kulu, was waiting for news with the main force. After seeing the 1st Regiment return, Kulu couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Especially when he saw the smell of blood on the returning soldiers, he knew that the harvest was not small. Division Master, according to the mission, the scouts have reported that the enemy has already slowed down their marching pace. The tanned commander Wu Ba chuckled, his face full of pride. In this battle, he had led 2,000 cavalrymen and achieved a 1:1 ratio of casualties. On the other hand, he had lost less than 50 cavalrymen. This result could be said to be perfect. Hearing Wu Ba's report, Kulu nodded with satisfaction. Very good. This time, your first regiment will be given a merit. Next, we will continue to harass them. In short, we must delay the enemy's advance. 80 miles behind us is Bo Tian Mound. That will be the end of our retreat. There were still 3 days before the main force would complete the encirclement. In other words, he had to hold on for 3 more days. A distance of 80 miles could be covered in just a few hours for elite cavalrymen. One could imagine how much pressure he was under. As the regiment commander, Wu Ba naturally knew about their 1st Cavalry Division's mission. The complacent expression on his face immediately vanished. Don't worry, division leader. We will definitely complete the mission. Even if we have to sacrifice all of our brothers, we will still hold on for 3 days. That's right. This time, even if all of our 1st Cavalry Division dies, we will not let the enemy pass through Bo Tian Mound. Commander Kulu, who had always advocated for the smallest price to obtain the greatest victory, also changed his style at this moment. He was ready to go all out. If it was said that the loss of the 1st Cavalry Division would be able to kill 100,000 Kazakh cavalrymen, it would be worth it no matter how one looked at it. When Kulu received this mission, he knew that this was going to be a fierce battle. Although he did not like this way of fighting as a soldier, it was his duty to obey orders. For the greatest victory, so what if the 1st Cavalry Division lost their lives here? General Boda naturally did not know Kulu's plan. Because of the repeated attacks, he became more cautious. When the army advanced, the distance between the cavalrymen became closer. In addition, the number of scouts increased. Although the 5-star army would occasionally appear to harass the enemy, most of them were repelled by General Boda. The army did not suffer any losses. The price of this was that the marching speed of the army was very slow, to the point that by noon the next day, General Kelly had already caught up to them with the main force. After seeing the vanguard moving so slowly, Kelly was naturally dissatisfied. He had a guard call Boda over and scolded him. Boda also knew that the marching speed was too slow, so he did not say anything. When he saw that Kelly was tired of scolding, he made his request. He needed more cavalry. Only by increasing the number of scouts could the army advance faster. Kelly still valued Boda very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to be the vanguard general. Since Boda said so, he naturally had his own considerations and difficulties. Kelly quickly agreed to this request. He immediately assigned 5,000 cavalrymen to the vanguard as scouts. With the addition of these new cavalrymen, whenever there was a dense forest on both sides of the road, groups of cavalrymen would rush into it, looking for any unsafe factors. It was also because of this action that several companies of the 5-star army that had been lying in ambush were discovered. Among them, one company was a little slow in retreating and was surrounded by these Kazakh cavalry scouts. After an hour of bitter battle, the company was completely wiped out. When the news reached the ears of Division Commander Kulu, his face became very serious. There were still 2 days before the main force could complete the encirclement. The speed and reaction of the Kazakh cavalry far exceeded his expectations. If he did not send out the main force, he was afraid that they would not be able to last until then. Order the 2nd Regiment to attack in units. In short, the main task is to delay the enemy's advance. If we can fight, then we can. If we can delay, then we can. Kulu gave the order with a pained expression. When he saw the 2nd Regiment commander leading the soldiers of the 2nd Regiment away, his eyes were filled with tears. He was very clear in his heart that it would be good if 20% of the soldiers came back. They are all heroes. Gazing at the departing figures of the 2nd Regiment, the 1st Regiment commander Wu Ba also spoke like this. Then, when he turned around to look at Kulu, he stood at attention and said, "Senior Commander, the 1st Regiment requests permission to attack after the 2nd Regiment. The 1st Regiment will stay behind and fight for the last time." Kulu shook his head. In terms of fighting strength, the 1st Regiment was naturally the strongest. Since that was the case, the best steel should be used on the edge of the blade. When the time came, he and the 1st Regiment would be the last barrier to stop the Kazakh army from advancing. Time passed by minute. The 3rd Regiment of the 4th Regiment and the 2,000 black cavalry led by Yang Chendong had arrived at the designated location 3 hours earlier than planned. From their point of view, they could faintly hear the sounds of killing from time to time. "Young master, our soldiers have found suitable places to hide." Beta Persei returned to Yang Chendong's side after patrolling the army. At the same time, he reported to Yang Chendong with a trace of worry on his face. Yang Chendong knew what Beta Persei was worried about. Not long ago, the commander of the new army, Su He, sent a telegram. After they got rid of the scouts sent by the Kazakh army, they were now rushing to the exit of Badian Mound. In other words, the main force of the new army had not arrived yet. Now, only the 1st Cavalry Division, who had stayed here in advance, could fight the enemy. A division of only 8,000 people, but they had to stop 100,000 iron cavalry. One could imagine how difficult this task was. Even if Beta Persei led the team, he could not guarantee that they would be able to complete the task. After Yang Chendong heard the report, his expression did not change. He put away the military binoculars in his hand and said without turning his head, "Go and ask where the 1st Cavalry Division is and how long it will take to reach the designated location." Chapter 1295. "Yes, I'll go right away." Beta Persei agreed and rushed to Wang Shan's telegram team. Yang Chendong, who was left behind, slowly turned around and sighed softly. How could he not know what kind of pressure the new army's 1st Cavalry Division was facing at this time? It was even possible that the entire division would be wiped out if they were not careful. But this was war, a war of blood and iron. It was either you die or I die. Anyone who was in the middle of it, if they showed even the slightest bit of mercy, they might cause the army to be doomed eternally. As the saying goes, the merciful cannot command an army. To achieve one's goal, there must be sacrifices. As long as the sacrifice was worth it, someone must do it. No matter how reluctant he was, he had to harden his heart. He had to be willing to give up. Only by giving up could he gain something. He saw this point very clearly and was also very rational. Now he only hoped that the 1st Cavalry Division could arrive at the designated location as soon as possible. This way, the pressure on the new army's 1st Cavalry Division should be much less. The 1st Cavalry Division was indeed the trump card of the cavalry. Under the leadership of Division Commander Tian Hu, they had been hurrying on their way ever since they received the mission. During this period, many warhorses fell to the side of the road due to exhaustion, foaming at the mouth, but Tian Hu still did not order the troops to slow down. He only left a company of soldiers to take care of these meritorious warhorses. The main force of the division was still moving forward bravely. After several days of continuous travel, even the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were regarded as the most elite and powerful existence among the cavalry, still had many soldiers whose legs were worn out and blood flowed down their trousers. There were also some soldiers who did not get any rest for a long time. They fell asleep while sitting on their warhorses. Some even fell off their horses because they could not hold the reins and were injured. There were casualties at any time. But no matter what happened, Tian Hu did not ask them to stop even once. Even if they had to eat, he asked the soldiers to eat on horseback. It was only at this time that the warhorses would slow down from their galloping state. But even so, the cavalry soldiers were still a bit faster than the other cavalry units. After a few days of non-stop travel, they finally arrived at the designated ambush location. At this moment, they were 8 hours ahead of schedule. This half a day's time was bought with the lives of the brave warriors of the 1st Cavalry Division. According to the statistics, out of the 20,000 people in the division, the number of non-combat casualties during the march had reached 2,000. They were the world's #1 cavalry division. Every soldier who could enter this place was carefully selected. Even so, the losses they suffered were so great. It could be imagined that this operation was clearly not a mission, but a race against time and life. As soon as they entered battle position, the transmitter immediately reported the news to Yang Chendong through the radio. After hearing the news, Yang Chendong, who always had a cold expression on the battlefield, couldn't help but exclaim loudly, "Good, the soldiers are all good. After this battle, all of you will have meritorious service. Now it is time for us to attack. Inform the new army and the 1st Cavalry Division that we will launch an all-out attack in half an hour. We must annihilate the enemy." Within the long and narrow Batian Mound Canyon, the battle was currently in full swing. The smell of blood filled everyone's nostrils. Blood could be seen everywhere, dyeing the ground red. The Kazakh army's performance was far more ferocious than Division Commander Kulu had expected. They seemed to have already seen through the 5-star army's intention to stop them. As soon as they entered the canyon, they launched a frenzied attack. As if frightened by the tall mountains and boulders on both sides of the road, General Kelly continuously sent reinforcements to the vanguard, striving to leave this place as quickly as possible, rushing out of this dangerous place that he felt was far from good. During this period of time, General Kelly did hesitate. After looking at the surrounding terrain, he discovered that this was a very good place to set up an ambush. He thought of ordering the army to retreat. Since there was the 5-star army blocking the way, they could just retreat from here. However, when he considered the fact that there were carriages carrying provisions and supplies behind them, it would be easy for the cavalry to turn around. However, it wouldn't be so easy for the supply carriages to turn around. If they rashly moved forward, the army would be in chaos and a scene of internal strife would occur. At that time, if the 5-star army came from behind, the consequences would be unimaginable. Yesterday, the scouts also sent news that they didn't discover any 5-star army's main force. I think my worries were unnecessary. Kelly comforted himself like this. At the same time, he had a trace of hope in his heart. He also gave the vanguard General Boda a death order. Within 4 hours, they had to open this passage and let the army smoothly pass through here. For this, he added another 10,000 soldiers to the vanguard. Boda, who had the authority to command more troops, had his morale greatly boosted. Under his command, he led the cavalry to charge forward fiercely and quickly wiped out the main force of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. After a series of battles, the exit of the canyon was right in front of them. Hope was right in front of them. The 1st Cavalry Division, who fought with all their might, couldn't stop themselves from retreating. During this time, Kulu, who was the division commander, also pulled out his saber and joined the battle. Even the direct subordinate battalion of the 1st Cavalry Division charged forward. It was precisely because Kulu had suppressed the last of his strength that he was able to save the life of the 1st Regiment commander, Wu Ba, allowing this regiment commander who had already fainted to be pulled back from the battlefield. However, at this time, there were less than 500 cavalrymen left. In a short 2 days, the 1st Cavalry Division went from a full strength of 8,400 men to less than 1,000 men. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were almost completely wiped out. This result was far more tragic than what Kulu had imagined. Kulu, who was wearing a white battle robe that was now dyed red, turned his wrist and looked at the military watch that the 6th young master had personally given to him. His face was gloomy. There were still 14 hours until the appointed time, but the soldiers in his hands were almost exhausted. Perhaps in the next charge, the entire army would be wiped out. He might also die on the battlefield like the majority of the soldiers, wrapped in horse hide. If he were to die on the battlefield, Kulu had already mentally prepared himself for this from the day he joined the 5-star army. However, he really couldn't accept dying like this. He still hadn't completed his mission. Once the Kazakh army charged out of the canyon behind them, all of the plans that Yang Chendong had made before would become useless. The soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division would also die in vain. This was something that he absolutely couldn't accept. Fight, no matter what, we have to hold on for 16 hours. Kulu used his blood-soaked battle robe to wipe the glowing white saber in his hand. His face flashed with a resolute expression. There were less than 1,000 cavalrymen around him. Most of them were injured, and some of them were even seriously injured. They were still bleeding. However, at this moment, no one doubted his words. They firmly believed that as long as they were still alive, they wouldn't allow any enemy to charge out. Kulu arranged for 2 bodyguards to send the unconscious Wu Ba away. This could be considered the last bloodline that he left for the 1st Cavalry Division. Then he looked up at the sky. It was currently noon. The sun hung high in the sky, emitting a gentle warmth. The sunlight shone on every soldier's body. Kill! After the Kazakh army reorganized the cavalry, they once again charged forward. This time, General Boda personally led the charge. This showed that they were determined to solve this problem in one battle. The battle cries of the opposing cavalry resounded throughout the canyon. Looking from afar, sand and dust filled the sky. There were probably more than 10,000 cavalrymen. Some people said that when there were more than 10,000 cavalrymen, there was no end to them. At this moment, Kulu and the less than 1,000 cavalrymen of the 1st Cavalry Division felt that way. It was like a ferocious beast with its mouth wide open. It made people feel fearful. At this moment, no matter if it was Kulu, the division commander, or the soldiers, their faces didn't change. It was as if they didn't see the approaching danger. Every soldier only tightly gripped the saber in their hands, looking as if they were facing death with equanimity. For the soldiers who had already disregarded life and death, and even had the heart to die, there was no difference whether there were 1,000 or 10,000 enemies. They only knew that they had to use the last of their strength to block the enemy until they were killed and couldn't move anymore. Everyone, hold your sabers and prepare to charge with me. The target was constantly approaching. When it was less than 3 li away, Kulu also raised the sharp saber in his hand, looking like a moth flying into a flame. Kill! The remaining less than 1,000 cavalrymen also raised their sabers at this moment. Every one of them had a serious expression and didn't show the slightest bit of fear. Do-do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. Just as Kulu's saber was about to fall from the air and slash down, a loud bugle suddenly sounded, resounding in the ears of every soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division. This is the retreat signal. Kulu instantly reacted when he heard the bugle. Then he immediately turned to look at the 2 remaining bugle masters of the 1st Cavalry Division. After confirming that it wasn't them who made the sound, he saw that they had the same doubts as him. Division Commander, this is the retreat signal. After the 2 bugle masters recovered from their shock, they said in unison, "It really is the retreat signal. Retreat." After getting a definite answer, Kulu only hesitated for a moment before shouting loudly. As if he was afraid that the others didn't react quickly enough, he was the first to tighten the reins of his saber and made a gesture of turning around. At this moment, the retreat signal was definitely the main force of the 5-star army. In other words, all the plans were in place, and the 1st Cavalry Division's mission was completed. At this moment, he didn't want to lose any of his cavalry brothers because after going through so many bloody battles, those who could still survive and continue to jump on their horses to kill the enemy would be the best of the best. If he kept one of these people, there would be more elite soldiers in the future. These were all treasures, and they couldn't afford to lose them. Chapter 1296. First, there was the signal to retreat. Next, there was Kulu's movement. Close to 1,000 5-star soldiers all turned their horses around and followed behind Kulu, quickly heading towards the exit of the canyon behind them. At this time, the 10,000 Kazakh riders led by Boda were only a little more than a mile away from them. For a real cavalry, this distance could be reached in about 100 breaths. However, when the 5-star army suddenly retreated and fled, they were caught off guard. Although there were less than 1,000 of them, Boda, who had fought with them for several days, did not underestimate them. In his opinion, the 5-star army was extremely difficult to deal with, as if they were made of iron. However, he did not expect that the bitter battle that he had imagined would not happen. Instead, the enemy had fled. After a moment of hesitation, Boda's face lit up with joy. "Ha, did you see that? The 5-star army is also human. They can run away too. Charge! Catch up with them and kill them. Let them know that the sabers in our hands can easily chop off the head of any enemy." The 5-star army's cavalry had always been determined to fight to the last man no matter what kind of battle they faced. This was different from the battle Boda had imagined. He had always thought that a cavalry battle was a battle of one's fighting spirit. As long as one side suffered too many losses, their fighting spirit would collapse. At that time, it would be time for the victorious side to reap the fruits of their labor. This kind of rule was not practical for the 5-star army. There was no such thing as their fighting spirit collapsing. They would always fight to the last man. Every time he took a step forward, he had to pay a heavy price. But now, the 5-star army had finally fled. At this moment, Boda felt a sense of relief. This was how cavalry should behave. The 5-star army had returned to normal. Boda was overjoyed and shouted loudly as he led the 10,000 cavalry to charge forward. If it was said that the 5-star army that dared to face him head-on would still make him somewhat fearful, then the 5-star army that had lost their morale and only cared about fleeing was simply not worth his attention. He only needed to charge forward and slaughter them. At this point, the outcome of the battle seemed to have been decided. Boda could not help showing a victorious look on his face. Although he had paid a price this time, he had killed at least 7,000 of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. This kind of achievement was enough to make him proud. Everyone else had been defeated by the 5-star army, but he was the only one who had killed so many members of the 5-star army and even chased after them. Wouldn't that make him the most powerful person? When he thought about how many people would look at him in a new light after this battle, the smug look on his face became more and more intense. He seemed to have already seen countless silvers and the best official position waiting for him. Under Boda's command, the 10,000 cavalrymen's morale soared and they charged even faster. They were getting closer and closer to the 5-star army, which was less than 1,000 soldiers. 1.5 miles, 1 mile, less than 300 meters. Just as they were about to charge forward and kill to their heart's content, Kulu and the rest of the 1st Cavalry Division finally charged out of the canyon. When they walked out of Bo Tian Mound, they saw the new army's main cavalry formation with their bows drawn. "Commander!" When Kulu saw Commander Su He, who was standing in front of the middle corps, his tears flowed out involuntarily. He did not cry when the 2nd Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry when the 3rd Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry when the 4th Regiment was wiped out. He did not cry even when he knew that he was going to die in battle. But now, at the moment when he saw Su He after the war, he couldn't stop his tears from flowing out. Su He's eyes were red as well. When he saw that the 1st Cavalry Division was left with less than 1,000 cavalrymen, he knew how tragic the battle was. So many good soldiers had died just like that. As the commander, he naturally felt terrible. However, he knew that this was not the time to reminisce about the past. It was the time for revenge. "Commander Ku, quickly go and rest. The military's medical center is already prepared. You are all meritorious soldiers. You must persevere and survive. Now watch us take revenge for all of you." In this battle, the 1st Cavalry Division had perfectly executed their plan to lure the enemy in. They had been leading the enemy by the nose. Although the losses were not small in the end, it was worth it no matter how one looked at it. Kulu had made a wrong decision before and caused Kulu to lose the position of commander. Now that he had made a great contribution, he should be the first choice when there was an empty position next time. Kulu was indeed exhausted. With such a big burden on his shoulders, he basically hadn't rested for the past few days. In addition to the injuries on his body, although they weren't fatal, if he didn't want to leave any sequelae, a good rest was necessary. He nodded and said, "All right, your subordinate will take his leave." Kulu left, but the real battle had only just begun. Following closely behind the 1st Cavalry Division was Boda and his 10,000 Kazakh cavalrymen. After turning a corner, they finally saw the exit of Badian Mound. Just as the army was thinking about how they could finally go all out, they were greeted by Chang Bo of the 4th Cavalry Division of the 3rd Cavalry Division, which had over 8,000 cavalrymen and archers ready to shoot their arrows at any moment. They had been running back and forth for the past few days. In order to make the enemy think that they had really fled, the 4th Cavalry Division had no choice but to leave with the main force. Now that they were finally back, Chang Bo was envious of the 1st Cavalry Division's achievements. When it was time for him to perform, he would not be polite. He shouted, Fire! 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 This shout echoed countless times when it hit the huge rock at the entrance of the canyon. This shout made the 4th Cavalry Division's 5-star Army's archers' eyes spit fire. Their killing intent filled the sky. With this shout, the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division loosened their right arms. Immediately, countless arrows shot out from their hands, creating many pleasant whooshing sounds. A dense rain of arrows pierced through the air and smashed into the unprepared Kazakh cavalry. Soon, the sound of soldiers falling off their horses could be heard. From time to time, it was accompanied by cries of pain and alarm. 2 waves of arrows were released. More than 16,000 arrows were shot from afar, like a giant blade falling from the sky. 30% of the Kazakh cavalry vanguard was cut down. Unfortunately, Boda, the general, was also in the range of the arrows. When he turned the corner, he saw countless archers waiting for him. When he saw the neat formation of the 5-star Army soldiers, he knew that something was wrong. However, his opponent did not give him any chance to catch his breath or react. The arrows came at him as if they were free. He only swung his saber to cut down 3 arrows. Then, the 4th arrow hit him in the chest, followed by the 5th, 6th, and 7th arrows. In a short period of time, he fell to the ground like a porcupine. Even until the moment of his death, he still did not understand where the 5-star Army had come from. Also, since the 5-star Army had so many brave soldiers, why were they in such a sorry state when they were chased by him? Was it really that fun to tease him? With the death of Boda, the Kazakh vanguard cavalrymen who had lost their commander and were heavily injured by the arrows immediately turned around and fled like headless flies. Their faces changed drastically, and they were no longer as high-spirited and complacent as they were when they came out of the canyon. Kill! The 2nd Cavalry Division's division commander Bai Kai and the 3rd Cavalry Division's division commander Lei Chuandang, who had been waiting by the side, roared. More than 10,000 cavalrymen charged into the canyon. The 2 cavalry divisions that had been holding back finally had a chance to use their skills. At this time, they could not wait to charge into the enemy's cavalrymen. They waved their sabers and killed in all directions. One chased while the other fled. In just a short period of time, everyone had changed their roles. The only difference was that the Kazakh cavalrymen were really fleeing. Moreover, they were fleeing with a goal in mind. They thought that once they could meet up with the main force, they could change the situation of being chased by the enemy. However, they did not know that the current situation of the main force was not much better than theirs. In fact, it was even worse. When the agreed time of attack arrived, Yang Chendong, who had been hiding above the canyon, gave the order to attack. It was above the canyon that Yang Chendong saw the bravery of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division with his own eyes. However, he did not move. This was not because Yang Chendong was cold-blooded. Instead, it was because he knew that impatience in small matters would spoil great plans. If they attacked now, they could help the 1st Cavalry Division suppress the enemy. However, before the 1st Cavalry Division was in position and sealed off the enemy's escape route, doing so would only cause the Kazakh cavalrymen to become vigilant. If that happened, the plan of cutting off the enemy's head, waist, and tail would be ruined. This was something that Yang Chendong absolutely could not allow to happen. He could only watch all of this happen and hope that the 1st Cavalry Division could survive this cruel and bloody battle. Fortunately, the 1st Cavalry Division was 16 hours ahead of schedule. This gave the 1st Cavalry Division a ray of hope. Although the losses were disastrous, there were still close to 1,000 cavalrymen who survived. With these 1,000 cavalrymen as the backbone, presumably the day when the 1st Cavalry Division was reorganized and restored to fighting strength would not be too far away. Seeing his own soldiers being bullied, Yang Chendong could finally retaliate. How could he be polite? Under his orders, the rocks piled up above the canyon tumbled down, disrupting the Kazakh army's formation. Then, 10,000 guns were fired. Under the muzzles of the 3 cold vanguard divisions, bullets flew out. The enemy cavalrymen were like living targets, becoming targets. In an instant, they were shot into a hornet's nest. One by one, they fell from their horses. Chapter 1297. Using the 95 style to attack a group of saber-wielding cavalrymen from a high vantage point, occupying the most advantageous terrain, this was indeed bullying. However, war would not stop just because it was unfair. Here, there was only victory and defeat, only the strong and the weak. There was no reason to speak of. It was rare for them to participate in such a large-scale military operation. The soldiers of the 4th Army Division were extremely excited. As the 3 regimental commanders, they were also extremely excited. They quickly changed from shooting at the soldiers to shooting at the enemy generals. One by one, the Kazakh cavalry's Kiliarchs and centurions were shot through by the bullets and fell off their horses. The sound of gunfire fell on the Kazakh cavalry, taking away one terrifying blood after another. This caused Keliai's face to turn from white to black and his body to tremble incessantly. He was just a descendant of the Mongols. He thought that cavalry was the best in the world and that with a saber and a strong horse, he could gallop through the world. When had he ever seen such a battle before? When the sound of firecrackers echoed in his ears, one by one, the cavalrymen fell off their horses and died without a doubt. This is the firearm soldiers that people speak of? How can they be so powerful? When did they appear beside us? Who can tell me? Under the protection of his personal guards, Keliai was not in danger for the time being. However, when he saw his subordinates dying one after another from time to time, his face was filled with shock and fear. He did not know when he would be like the other soldiers and be shot to death. No one could answer Keliai's question. Many of the superstitious Kazakh cavalry had already regarded the 5-star army as a godly existence. Think about it, if it was not a godly existence, how could they suddenly appear here? If it was not a godly existence, how could they have such a long range and powerful firearm? General, what should we do? What should we do? The 2 captains beside Keliai said in a sobbing voice. In the face of such a long range and powerful firearm, they did not have the slightest ability to fight back. This kind of weapon had already exceeded their imagination. It brought them nothing but fear. Their fighting spirit and morale had already fallen to the extreme. When a person wielding a broadsword is facing a submachine gun, even if you have 1,000 skills, it would be difficult to use them, right? At this moment, these Kazakh cavalry had such mentality. When their fighting spirit had collapsed, they didn't think about how to rush up the canyon. In fact, they didn't have the ability to face the 95 style. The only thing he could do now was to think of a way to escape this hell on earth. What to do? Of course, it was to rush out, but Keliai hadn't decided whether to rush forward or retreat. But soon, someone helped him make the decision. The vanguard fled back. Not only that, there were 2 divisions of 5-star army soldiers behind them. Once he heard that the road ahead was blocked, Keliai did not hesitate and immediately gave the order to retreat. At this moment, he didn't care whether or not this would cause him to trample. He also didn't want to do this. He only wanted to leave this place and get away from the 5-star army. He wanted to get away from death and danger. Finally, there was an order. Although the battlefield was very chaotic, at least there was a direction. The Kazakh cavalry were like a monstrous flood. They finally found an opening to break the dam and quickly retreated. In the process of retreating, under the chaotic situation, who knew how many incidents of infighting occurred? It wasn't just trampling. Sometimes, some cavalry felt that others were blocking their escape route. They felt that others were blocking the way, so they would cut them with their broadswords. It was really like opening a path when you meet a mountain, building a bridge when you meet a river. Blow the bugle call. Standing on the canyon, Yang Chendong looked coldly at everything that was happening in front of him. Especially when he saw that the 2 divisions of New Army's cavalry were forced to stop because of the gunshots and were unable to charge into the Kazakh army, he finally gave the order to charge. Immediately, the gunshots stopped and the loud bugle call sounded. The New Army's cavalry instantly moved and killed their way into the battlefield. As they charged, they shouted loudly, "Those who surrender can live, those who resist must die." The Kazakh cavalrymen, who had already lost their composure and were scared out of their wits, felt as if they had heard the sound of nature. One by one, they threw down the weapons in their hands, jumped off their war horses and knelt on the ground. The hellish situation was finally coming to an end. Who knew how many cavalry soldiers let out a long sigh of relief? "Commander Ling, bring the warriors down to receive the captives." Now that the situation was settled, Yang Chendong's expression was somewhat relaxed as he spoke to Commander Ling Duqiang. Then, Yang Chendong turned around and looked at Beta Persei and the two captains Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao who were eager to fight. His face revealed a trace of a smile as he said, "Black cavalry, get on your horses and charge with this king. Kill!" Finally, they had a chance to show off their might. The 2,000 black cavalry soldiers excitedly put on their black helmets and black armor. One by one, they raised their sabers and followed Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, towards the entrance of Badian Mound. At this moment, at the entrance, the battle had already begun. With the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Tian Hu, leading more than 18,000 cavalrymen, they had already launched an attack in half an hour. The rear of the army was mainly responsible for transporting rations and supplies. Although they had previously promised the Kazakh army that the 3 provinces would be supplied by the Kazakh army, this time, Kelei had brought a lot of rations from his own country. When he returned, he only needed to ask the other side for the rations. Otherwise, wouldn't he be unable to see the main forces of the 3 countries and not obtain the rations that the army needed? It was precisely because he had brought a lot of provisions that Kelei had arranged for 5,000 elite cavalrymen to guard the rear army. With the existence of these cavalrymen, even if they were attacked, there wouldn't be any problems. As long as they resisted for a while, his main army would quickly come back to help. Everything was arranged well, but when the opponent was the 1st Cavalry Division, this so-called no problem became a big problem. In front of the 1st Cavalry Division, there wasn't a single cavalry unit that couldn't be destroyed. They didn't even use the Big Dipper crossbow, just relying on their strong bows. When the 1st Cavalry Division appeared, they shot 4 arrows in a row. Here, it should be noted that after an ordinary cavalry launched an attack, they would only be able to fire 2 arrows before involuntarily receiving the enemy's attacks. It was already very difficult for the stronger cavalrymen to shoot 3 arrows. However, in the 1st Cavalry Division, they could shoot 4 arrows in a row within a short distance of 100 meters. There were even some who were more powerful who could shoot 5 arrows in a row. With so many arrows flying through the air, the arrows didn't stop after seeing the cavalrymen. After 4 rounds of arrows, at least a third of the 5,000 cavalrymen were killed, and a third of them were injured and couldn't continue fighting. When there were only 1,000 or so cavalrymen left, facing the charge of the 1st Cavalry Division, they were defeated before they could even cause a ripple. A huge opening appeared on the battlefield, allowing the 5-star Army's cavalrymen to pass through. When Yang Chendong arrived with 2,000 black cavalry, he saw the Kazakh cavalrymen lying on the ground, as well as a few soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division cleaning the battlefield, watching and counting the captives. "You come here." Beta Persei's eyes widened. He pointed to an officer with the rank of captain and asked, "What's going on here? Where's your division commander?" The soldiers who could become the cavalry of the number 1 cavalry division in the world were all 1 in 100 or even 1,000 in the army. To be able to become a company commander, it was unknown how many bloody battles they had experienced and how many meritorious deeds they had achieved. Such a person naturally knew Yang Chendong and the Black Cavalry. When he saw that the person who greeted him was Beta Persei, Bugnam of Gojoseon's personal guard, he quickly trotted over and saluted. "Report, we are cleaning the battlefield and counting the captives and supplies. Our division commander has already led the army in?" Beta Persei, who had long expected this result, couldn't help but ask anxiously, "How long has it been?" "It's been nearly half an hour." As an officer of the 5-star army, he was used to the saying of 24 hours. When he reported, he naturally answered with such a rule. "Hiss." Beta Persei sucked in a breath of cold air, his face a little bitter. "It's been half an hour, this Tian whose speed is really fast. Young master, what do you think? Let's catch up." Yang Chendong also knew that his idea of participating in a big battle was probably going to be dashed, but since he came, how could he return empty-handed? He had to go to the battlefield to take a look. Yes, let's go. At that moment, the 2,000 black cavalry rushed straight ahead, leaving behind billowing smoke and dust. At this moment, on the battlefield, one side was completely overwhelming the other side. Under the protection of his personal guards, Clay finally managed to escape from the center of the army. Just as he had a glimmer of hope, he quickly lost all hope. This was because he saw General Toljan, who was supposed to be in charge of the rear army. Thorjen had been chased here by the 1st Cavalry Division with less than 10,000 cavalrymen in the sky. It wasn't that he didn't think of resisting, but when he saw his rear army facing the world's 1st Cavalry Division and couldn't even parry, he knew that this was the elite of the elite. It wasn't something he could handle. He wanted to rush to the center of the army to meet up with General Kalii and use the advantage of numbers to kill his way back. Who would have thought that the situation in the Middle Army was worse than the situation in the Middle Army? When he saw that General Clay only had less than 3,000 to 4,000 cavalry around him, and their formation was in chaos, he knew that things were not going well. Chapter 1298. Why are you here? When Kalii saw General Toljan, his face was also filled with fear. He instantly thought of a possibility, and his heart sank to the bottom. Since the enemy had set up an ambush on both sides of the canyon, why didn't they know to cut off his escape route? It was ridiculous that he thought that going back was the only way out. This was the 5-Star Army's plan. However, there was another problem. How did so many 5-Star Army soldiers appear here? Didn't the scout report that there were no 5-Star Army units around here? The 5-Star Army had only invested a total of over 200,000 soldiers on the battlefield. Shouldn't their main force be on the way to the Forsaken City? Where did the 5-Star Army come from? There were countless questions in his mind, but no one could answer him. Because at this moment, the 1st Cavalry Division and the new army from the front had already surrounded them. He only had about 10,000 cavalry with him, but looking at the cavalry of the 5-Star Army in front and behind him, both groups seemed to have more soldiers than him. Moreover, he was going to be attacked from both sides. It was obvious what the outcome would be. "General, what should we do?" Toljan, who was still holding his saber, couldn't help but ask. He wanted to charge out like a man, but he knew that it was an impulsive action. It was simply suicide. Those who surrender can live, those who resist must die. The shouts from the front and back were deafening. Tens of thousands of 5-Star Army soldiers roared. The Kazakh cavalrymen who were trapped here trembled. They looked at the front and back and didn't know what to do. What should we do? What else can we do? Surrender. Seeing that the situation was about to change, Kalii let out a long sigh and threw the saber in his hand to the ground. Then he jumped off his horse and squatted down with his hands covering his head. As Kalii took the initiative to dismount and surrender, the cavalrymen around him all followed suit. A battle of 200,000 people ended just like that. From noon to the morning of the 3rd day, around 15,000 Kazakh cavalrymen were killed in less than 24 hours. In the chaos, another 15,000 were trampled and 70,000 were captured. Another great victory appeared. Not only did they completely eliminate 100,000 Kazakh cavalrymen, but they also cleared a large obstacle for the 5-Star Army to take over the entire Ili region. Eliminating 100,000 cavalrymen in 2 days, this speed could only be achieved by the current 5-Star Army. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many captives, they wouldn't even need to waste this much time. Everyone has worked hard, rest for 2 days. At the same time, send out a regiment from the 1st Cavalry Division, a regiment from the 4th Army Division, and a division from the new army to look after the captives. The most important thing is to change their minds and try to make them useful. Those who surrender will be given priority to join the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. Let's rebuild the platform first. As for what happens next, we might as well stab the rear of the city. It is time to deal with their problem. Yang Chendong's words were shocking. Wiping out 100,000 cavalrymen in one go allowed Yang Chendong to have a better understanding of the strength of an army. He was no longer satisfied with the small victories and set his sights on the 160,000-strong Turpan army. If they were to forcefully attack, even if they could take down the city, the losses would not be small. After all, in the face of so many Turpan soldiers, even if they broke through the city gate, the following street battle would not be so easy. But now it was different. He had just captured Kazakh's generals Kalai and Togan. Coincidentally, these two people had participated in the five-nation coalition war before. Many Turpan people knew them. With such a magic weapon in hand, it would be a waste if he didn't make good use of it. Beta Persei, take good care of our two friends. Make sure they are obedient, but make sure they don't get any external injuries on their faces. After Yang Chendong assigned the task to Beta Persei, he led the Black Cavalry and left. If it was someone else who said that they were going to attack Kazakh, the other generals would have some concerns and hesitation. But since it was Yang Chendong who said it, no one doubted it. Everyone thought it was a matter of course. In 2 full days, the political cadres achieved remarkable results. They successfully persuaded more than half of the 40,000 captives to join the 5-star army. The rest did not seem to be a problem. Not only did this make up for the original losses, but it also increased the number of soldiers. Beta Persei did not let Yang Chendong down. After a good reception, both Kalai and Togan surrendered. After becoming prisoners, they had no other choice. They could either surrender or die. In the face of life and death, not many people could really not frown. With 40,000 more captives and persuading Kalai and Togan to join him, Yang Chendong knew that the time for the decisive battle had come. He called the generals around him and gave them the next task. In the big tent, Tian Hu, Ling Daqiang, Su He, Kulu and others had almost rested. At this moment, they were looking at Yang Chendong, who was sitting in the first place, with admiring eyes, waiting for the next battle order. Seeing everyone's spirit, Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. With so many powerful generals in his hands, what was there to worry about? Announce the order. After the 4 words were spoken, all the military commanders trembled. They puffed out their chests and waited for the order. Order: Kulu's 1st Cavalry Division will be rebuilt from the captives. After it's done, take 30,000 captives who don't surrender to Turpan and hand them over to the 5-star army. They'll be sent to the logistics headquarters in the first city in batches. Many places are undergoing major construction and need a lot of labor. Since these people don't want to bow their heads, they'll serve as laborers. Each of them will be sentenced to at least 20 years. If they perform well, their sentences can be reduced appropriately. Kulu was called out. Although it was a pity that he could not participate in the upcoming battle, escorting so many young and strong captives was also a big deal. Wasn't this the 6th young master's trust in him? He hurriedly agreed. When the other commanders heard that they had to serve for 20 years, they could not help but break out in a cold sweat. That was the most glorious 20 years of a man's life. It could be imagined that they would be little old men after the time was up. They probably wouldn't be able to do anything in life. But on the other hand, who could they blame for this? They dared to not surrender after becoming captives. It was already a good thing that they were not killed. After dealing with the captives, Yang Chendong said for the 2nd time, "Order Suhi's new army to take the lead. Escort 30,000 Kazakh captives to the city gate. Try to give a fatal blow to the leadership in the shortest time possible to assist in the upcoming street battles in the city and seize the absolute initiative. Of course, if we can persuade the other party to work for us, that would be the best. Well, Kalai and Thorjen can be used by you. Act according to the situation." Su He, who heard the order, quickly responded with a military salute. Although Kulu's 1st Cavalry Division was missing in this battle, there were more than 30,000 captives. In this way, he had more than 50,000 troops in his hands, which made his confidence soar. Order: the 4th Army Division and the 1st Cavalry Division to cover the rear. When the new army enters the city and opens the city gate, look for an opportunity to destroy the enemy. Yes. Ling Daqiang and Tian Hu both stood at attention and answered. Although they couldn't take the first credit this time, they didn't complain. They all knew that street battles were the most chaotic battles. They didn't want to fight with their elites like this. Yang Chendong must have considered this point and made this decision. As soon as the order was given, the army quickly moved. The officers all carried out their duties, and the army sped up towards Khaleesi city. At the same time, Yang Chendong also notified the 1st Regiment of the 4th Army Division, the Liaodong Cavalry Division, the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, the Light Cavalry Regiment, and the Reconnaissance Regiment that had already conquered Khaleesi city to speed up their march towards Khaleesi city. At that time, they would surround the 4 cities and not let a single enemy escape. A large net was being cast towards Khaleesi city. At this time, King Hardenbarter didn't know about this. The gates of Kuan-Si city, the northern gateway city, were quickly blasted open by the 5-Star Army's artillery bombardment. The cavalry took the opportunity to charge in and occupy the city. The king was currently organizing the army in his hands and making the corresponding arrangements for the war. The 5-Star Army relied on their powerful cannons to achieve victory. In Hardenbarter's eyes, while at the same time, he was extremely shocked. Regarding this, he specially called his General Daichin to discuss how to deal with this. General Daichin, who thought that he was already familiar with the 5-Star Army's tactics, didn't panic. In his view, no matter how strong the tactics were, there was still a way to deal with it. For example, if the same method was used on Khaleesi city, he wasn't that afraid. He had a total of 160,000 soldiers. Although most of them were new recruits and because of insufficient preparation, many of them only had weapons and didn't even have war horses, it was still 160,000 people. With such a number of soldiers, even if the 5-Star Army broke open the city gates, it would still be very difficult for them to enter the city. At that time, they only needed to send the soldiers to the streets to block them. With the geographical advantage, it wasn't impossible for them to fight. Once they held on for too long, when reinforcements appeared, it would be time for them to counterattack. In General Daichin's eyes, the 5-Star Army wasn't without weaknesses. For example, the lack of manpower was a very important disadvantage. Not to mention 1 versus 1, even 2 versus 1, he believed that in the end, the 5-Star Army would be the one who couldn't hold on. He didn't want to win. He only wanted to protect himself while hurting the 5-Star Army at the same time. Chapter 1299. On this point, King Hardenbarter had the same view. The 5-Star Army, who had a huge appetite, would definitely not lose too many soldiers in Forklift. As long as he could hold on, the 5-Star Army would retreat without attacking. Very good, General Daichin, I will hand these 160,000 soldiers over to me. You will be in charge of the arrangements in the city in order to deplete the strength of the 5-Star Army to the greatest extent. Yes, I will not disappoint my king. Daichin cupped his fists and said, he had suffered too many defeats recently, and it was rare for the king to trust him so much. It was time for him to display his strength and let others know that his title as the #1 general of Turpan was not just for show. In reality, Daichin had some ability, otherwise, he wouldn't have been so highly regarded by Hardenbarter. Unfortunately, his opponent was the 5-Star Army. Facing such a huge force, it wasn't possible to rely on a single person to turn the situation around. Daichin tried his best to arrange for troops to be stationed in the important areas of the city. He only placed a small amount of troops at the city gates. He was a person who knew when to advance and when to retreat. He knew that the city walls of Forklift would not be able to stop the bombardment of the 5-Star Army. At this time, Forklift City was in chaos. Many soldiers used the excuse of defending the important areas to seize the properties and ancestral homes of many rich people. As a result, the commoners complained and many people had no homes to return to. This was war, and the ones who suffered the most were the commoners at the bottom. Prices rose, safety was not guaranteed, and they lost their jobs. Their goal in life changed from how to live well to how to survive. It was truly a tragedy. Among the many properties that were taken over, 20 to 30 Turfan soldiers rushed into an unassuming silk shop. They used this place as an important reason to force the people here to leave, not allowing them to take any of their belongings. The sudden influx of so many Turfan soldiers holding short knives and spears caused a light to flash in the eyes of the guards in the shop. Their right hand habitually reached for their waist. They all had knives and could fight with the incoming soldiers. Everyone stop, calm down. A woman in a lavender dress with a white veil over her face walked out, escorted by a few maids. She softly stopped the guards from moving, before taking small steps forward to welcome the Turpan soldiers who had barged into the manor. "Gentlemen, you are?" Her voice was as clear and crisp as an oriole's, and it sounded very pleasant to the ears. This voice attracted the attention of all the Turkmen soldiers. One of the captains at the front had a primitive desire for beauty in his eyes as he strode forward to welcome the newcomer. As he walked, he said, "Oh, there's a beauty here. Ah, come, let this lord take a look at your charming little face." As he spoke, he had already arrived in front of the woman. At the same time, he reached out his hand and tore off the white veil. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Perhaps the woman's appearance was too stunning, so the captain had high expectations of her appearance. However, when the white veil was torn off, a face full of black spots appeared before him, causing him to stop in his tracks. Following that, he felt a wave of nausea in his stomach. Clearly, he was disgusted by the ugly appearance of the woman. Not only was her skin dark, there were also black spots on it. She was truly ugly to the extreme. It was hard to imagine how a woman like her could have such a pleasant voice and a decent figure. The woman's appearance frightened the captain. His hand that was hovering in the air quickly dropped. The teasing tone in his voice turned serious. "Are you the manager of this place? Let me tell you, this place has been expropriated. Leave this place immediately. Remember, you are not allowed to take any belongings. Otherwise, don't blame us for not recognizing you with our weapons." Expropriated? The woman put the white veil back on her face, completely concealing her shock. After she regained her composure, she nodded and said, "So that's how it is. Then we are only bringing some clothes to change into. Is that okay? You also know that we women always like to be beautiful." As the woman spoke, a piece of silver appeared in her sleeve and handed it to the captain. When he heard the woman say that she liked to be beautiful, the captain wanted to vomit. If it wasn't for the sake of the silver, he was afraid that he would have already flung her away. But since he had received the benefits, he had to do something. "Okay, hurry up. You can only pack some clothes. You are not allowed to take anything valuable." "Okay, we will listen to you." The woman quickly nodded, then turned around and said to the 4 women who followed her, "Go, pack a little. Sigh, I don't know when these days will end and where we will live." The women moved quickly. After a while, each of them came out with a cloth bag. Seeing how weak they were and how easy it was for them to carry the cloth bag, the captain knew that there was nothing valuable in it. He immediately waved his hand and without even checking, he said, "Okay, you have taken the things. Quickly leave." "Yes, sir." After the ugly woman bowed, she led the 4 maids and 4 guards out of the silk shop. When they reached the main street, they saw many homeless commoners and merchants just like them. Among them, there was no lack of people who were crying and wailing. The homes they relied on for survival had been occupied, and their wealth had been plundered clean. There were even some who had slightly beautiful women in their homes who had been snatched away. If there was any resistance, those soldiers would brandish their swords and kill them mercilessly. The various scenes that happened made the commoners feel as if the sky was falling and the earth was sinking. At this moment, other than crying loudly on the streets outside their homes, they seemed to be unable to do anything else. "Sister Nyen, it seems like they didn't come for us. We were just caught in the crossfire." After coming out and seeing what was happening outside, one of the maids said in a low voice. The so-called Sister Nyen was the ugly woman wearing a white veil. Her full name was Sun Nyen. Of course, the so-called silk shop and the face that made people not want to see it a second time were all a disguise. She was still very beautiful. After all, to be selected by the CIA and become a team leader, she had to pass the test in terms of beauty first. Yes, these Turpan soldiers have all gone crazy. How can the city not be in chaos when they treat the people like this? How can the country not be destroyed? Sister Nyen shook her head. Then she asked in a low voice, "Did you bring everything out?" "We brought everything out. We took apart the radio and held it in our hands. It was a close call just now. If they really wanted to search the package, I'm afraid we would have to fight." The guard who was asked was also a member of the CIA. He said with lingering fear, "It's good that you brought it out." Sister Nyen nodded. If they really had to fight to the death just now, she wouldn't have been worried. The 8 of them had all undergone professional training. Under a sudden attack, 20 to 30 ordinary Turpan soldiers wouldn't be a match for them. However, that would easily expose their identities. Since they were out, of course they couldn't go back. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Let's go to the 4th safe house. Then report this matter and wait for orders." The so-called 4th safe house was a residence of the rich and powerful in the city. Normally, they wouldn't go there because the security there was tight, and it was inconvenient to move around. However, it was the only place where they wouldn't be harassed. It was the safest place. Sister Nyen brought the 8 people to the 4th safe house. The radio was quickly set up. Then, they contacted their superiors and received new orders. Seeing this order that had to be completed, Sun Nyen was a little shocked. This mission wasn't easy to complete. Even if they wanted to complete it, they would lose a lot of people. However, when she saw that it was the 6th young master's order, she didn't hesitate at all. Even if it was Yang Chendong's order, so what if all of them were to be sacrificed? Go and inform all the team members in the city to come here for a meeting. There's an important mission. Sun Nyen said to her subordinates in an excited voice. The city was in chaos. Cries and screams could be heard everywhere. However, the people in power in Turpan didn't care about this at all. Compared to the suffering of the people, they cared more about their own safety. Especially when they found out that the main force of the 5-star army had arrived at the North Gate and could attack at any time, many of the officials couldn't sit still. They didn't know if they could defend the city this time. Could they stop the 5-star army? Just when everyone was worried, a piece of good news came into the city. The 100,000 Kazakh cavalry reinforcements had arrived outside the city. They had already appeared at the South Gate. It was said that the General Daichin had already brought people to welcome them. Aya, the heavens bless us. After finding out that there were 100,000 reinforcements, many of the Turpan officials in the city were very happy. In their view, with the help of these 100,000 cavalrymen, they would have more confidence in defending Forikai's city. At this moment, outside the South City, General Daichin was thinking the same thing. When he learned that the Kazakh cavalry had arrived outside the city, he immediately reported the news to the king. If it wasn't for the chaos in the city, the king of Hadenbar would have personally come out to greet them. General Daichin came to Kelly with a face full of joy. He stretched out his arms and gave Kelly a warm hug. To him, the appearance of the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry was like a ray of light in the dark night. It was the hope that they could persevere. Chapter 1300. Perhaps because he was too excited, Daichin didn't notice Kelly's ugly expression until he hugged him and felt his body stiffen. He then asked in surprise, "General Kelly, are you not feeling well?" Kelly bitterly smiled. He wanted to say that he was no longer a general, but a captive. However, he knew that there was a gun pointed at him from the side. He had seen the power of a gun before. Taking his life within 30 meters was as easy as stepping on an ant. Not to mention that the 2 people in charge of monitoring him were less than 10 meters away from him. He definitely didn't dare to gamble and didn't want to die. If he didn't want to die, then he had to follow the 5-star army's request. Kelly could only bitterly say, "General Daichin, I don't know if it's convenient, but I have something to say to you." It was this sentence that made Daichin, who had a trace of doubt, let down his guard. He thought that Kelly had something that he couldn't say, which was why his expression wasn't good. Considering that Kelly was here to help him, if there was a problem, he should help him. Thus, he nodded and said, "Of course it's convenient. We are friends, so we can talk about anything." Kelly was waiting for this sentence. After he finished speaking, he turned around and said, "If that's the case, then please follow me. What I want to say is confidential and I don't want too many people to know." Facing Kelly's request, Daichin didn't think too much. He only thought that Kelly was talking about conditions. After all, this was the help of 100,000 cavalry. If it was him, he would also make some requests. Thus, he only brought a few people and followed Kelly to the side of the cavalry army. When he walked in, Daichin noticed that there was a group of people waiting for him. Among them was an old acquaintance, Kazakh's General Toljan. It was because of this person's existence that he didn't think too much and continued to walk behind Kelly. General Daichin thought that he still had a long way to go, but Halier suddenly stopped and turned around with a bitter smile on his face. But this time, he didn't say anything. Instead, someone beside him spoke. General Daichin, I didn't think that we would meet here. How have you been? The person who spoke was the commander of the new army, Suhi. With regards to this person, Daichin naturally had a deep impression of him. Thinking back to the time when he brought his army to fight against him, he was defeated. That was the greatest humiliation to him. He curiously looked at the other party and didn't say anything. Hundreds of thoughts flashed through his mind. How could this person be so similar to the commander of the 5-star army? Without an answer, Daichin turned his gaze to Halier. Clearly, he wanted an answer. Why would the Kazakh cavalry walk together with a general of the 5-star army? Seeing that Daichin wanted to hear an explanation or an introduction, Halier reluctantly said, Then let me introduce you. This is General Suhi. He is the commander of the new army of the 5-star army. After saying this, Halier hurriedly moved his head to the side. Clearly, this betrayal of an ally made him very embarrassed. If possible, he wanted to find a hole to hide in. Hearing the introduction, General Daichin saw that the other party was indeed the commander of the new army of the 5-star army. His expression changed and his right hand habitually reached for his waist. Clearly, he had already felt the existence of danger. Unfortunately, it was already too late for him to react. Military Commander Suhi's guards, who had been observing all this from the side, stepped forward first. Two of them restrained Daichin from the left and right, pressing down on his shoulders so that his body couldn't move. At the same time, the bodyguards behind him were also restrained. All of this was done silently. Because it was far from the Turpan army, it didn't attract anyone's attention. Suddenly being restrained, General Daichin's face was naturally filled with anger. He looked at Halier, who had just turned around and scolded loudly, Halier, I trusted you so much. You actually surrendered to the 5-star army. You coward, you, enough? Suhi said with a look of disdain. Then he looked at the furious Daichin and said, Wanting to live isn't about being afraid of death. It's about seeing if there's any meaning in dying. Come, bring him here. After Suhi's words, a man who looked like a housekeeper was escorted over from the crowd. This was an old man over 50 years old. His appearance was nothing special, but when he appeared, in Daichin's eyes, it really made him pale with fright. He didn't have time to scold Halier and asked nervously, Housekeeper, why are you here? The person who came was Daichin's housekeeper. He had followed Daichin for tens of years and could be said to be his most trusted person. For him to appear here really surprised Daichin. But very quickly, his face changed again and again. He suddenly thought of something. As expected, after seeing Daichin, the old housekeeper cried painfully and said, Master, Madam, young general and the ladies were all captured by them. You have to make a decision. After hearing this, Daichin's whole body shook. He then used all of his strength to try and break free. It was just that the 5-star army was already prepared, and this strength was quickly suppressed. Unable to break free, Daichin could only curse, You bastards, if you dare to hurt a single hair of my family, I swear I will take your lives. Daichin was still shouting, looking like he was about to fight to the death. Suhi, who had already expected this, wasn't in a hurry. After a while, when the other party seemed to have vented enough and was about to use up all of his strength, he said, Your family is naturally very safe and well protected. But whether or not they will be safe will depend on General Daichin's choice. If you still want to work for the Hardenbartel that is about to be destroyed, then you have no one to blame. Threat? It was a blatant threat. On the battlefield, in order to win, one would do anything, not to mention against a foreign race. When Suhi was ordered to do this, he didn't feel any pressure at all. Now that the words had been spoken, All that was left was for General Daiqin to make his own choice. He was tired of scolding and shouting. At this moment, Daiqin finally calmed down. But from his undulating chest, he seemed to be struggling and didn't have the intention to make a decision. You are so stubborn. Suhi was determined to help him make a decision. General Daiqin, you are a good man, but your actions are really disgraceful. Think about it, you first betrayed the old king Jiaxi and helped Harden Bartle take the throne. Now that the old king is dead, are you worthy of him? Also, everyone says you are a person who loves your soldiers like your children. Are you willing to watch your brothers make unnecessary sacrifices? Think about the citizens in the city, most of them are homeless and have no food to eat. Every day you delay, who knows how many people will die because of various reasons. Although you are not the main culprit, you are an important accomplice. May I ask, who are you worthy of? When you die one day, will you have the face to face those who died unjustly? Every word landed on Daiqin's heart, causing his expression to change again and again. Very quickly, he was like a deflated balloon, unable to be as stubborn as before. Thinking about his actions recently, it was really as Suhi said. He was not a good man. How did he become a person who had no king, no father, no brothers and no citizens? Suhi also saw Daiqin's thoughtful expression and knew there was hope. He continued, people say that if you know you are wrong, you should change. As long as you turn back now, it is not too late. Because you made the right choice, I believe many people will thank you. This is also your only chance to redeem yourself. Where to go, quickly make your choice. The group had been delayed here for a while and it was inevitable that people would think too much. What they needed to do now was to end this quickly. If Daiqin cooperated with him, that would be the best. But if he didn't, then they would just kill their way into the city. The only difference was that it would take more effort and more people would die. Suhi's words were like a hammer that smashed heavily on Daiqin's chest. Finally, after some hesitation, he made the decision to cooperate. Okay, I am willing to cooperate with the 5-star army, but I hope you won't start a massacre in the city. Finally agreeing, Suhi let out a sigh of relief and nodded. General Daiqin, please don't worry about this. We won't harm the citizens. After all, these people will become Yangtze's citizens in the future. As for the soldiers in the city, as long as they don't resist, we promise we won't do anything to them. Hearing this promise, Daiqin's face revealed a relieved expression. Maybe Suhi was right. What he was going to do now was to redeem himself for his previous mistakes. Since Daiqin agreed to cooperate, the next step was naturally much easier. He first gathered all the generals under him and started to persuade them to surrender under the encirclement of the new army of the 5-star army. Daiqin really treated his subordinates well. After he revealed his intentions, and with the deterrence of the 5-star army, no one objected and everyone agreed to follow the general's decision. This was something that couldn't be helped. The 5-star army had already killed their way into the city. At this time, there was no point in resisting. Instead, they would sacrifice their own lives. And this kind of meaningless sacrifice was something no one was willing to do. Chapter 1301. With the cooperation of the generals under Daiqin Yu, the 5-star army quickly entered the city. Following the request, all the Turfan soldiers who agreed to enter had a red rope tied around their right arm, as a sign of distinction. Then the army entered the city. Along the way, no one stopped them, and no one came to stop them. This didn't mean that the situation was settled. Because Daiqin was riding at the front, many soldiers didn't know what was going on. Furthermore, the military power of Turpan wasn't completely in Daiqin's hands. The tiger seal was still in the hands of King Harden Barter. If they didn't convince him, the problem wouldn't be solved. Daiqin, who also knew this, unexpectedly volunteered to enter the temporary palace to see Harden Barter. He wanted to persuade him. This was also the best way he could redeem himself. This idea was good, but Suhi didn't think highly of this mission. Especially when he thought about what Yang Chendong told him before they came. In Turpan, anyone could surrender except for King Harden Barter. To others, Surrendering was just a transfer from one faction to another. Perhaps their position would be demoted, but they would still have to listen to someone else's orders. But to their masters, it was completely different. They would fall from their high position and become prisoners. This was something that was hard to accept. General Daichin, your idea is good, but how confident are you in convincing Hardenbarter? Suhi asked the question in front of everyone. This. As expected, Daichin revealed a troubled expression. He then said, 30%. 30%? That won't do. That's too low. You're just sending yourself to death. Hearing this answer, Suhi immediately rejected. Now, Daichin was his captive. Since he was his captive, he had the right and responsibility to ensure his safety. Daichin wasn't angry that his request was rejected. Instead, he was happy. This proved that Daichin cared about him. This touched him a little. But because of this, he decided to do this. This was his way of returning the favor. General Su, please agree to my request. This is indeed a bit risky, but if it succeeds, the benefits will be great. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the city will no longer have to suffer the pain of war, and the people will be able to live a peaceful life again. It's just a risk, but it's worth it. What Daichin said made sense. Suhi hesitated for a moment. Since he was going to be the vanguard, he naturally hoped to complete the task beautifully. By the time the sixth young master arrived, all the problems would have been solved. What kind of contribution would that be? Seeing that Suhi didn't immediately reject him, Daichin felt that there was hope. He hurriedly said, General Su, I will do my best to ensure my own safety. I will use the excuse of welcoming General Kaliai to bring some soldiers into the temporary palace. General Su can also send some 5-star army to follow. If it really doesn't work, we can still retreat. This wasn't a bad idea. Suhi thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. No matter what, if there was a chance, it was worth a try. If worst came to worst, he could just leave the palace. With his new army already in Khaleesi City, he definitely had the ability to provide support outside the palace. Just like that, the two quickly discussed some things. At the same time, they also convinced General Toljan of Kazakh to represent Kaliai and follow Daichin into the temporary palace. This way, not only could they bring more soldiers, they could also look after each other. To ensure everyone's safety, he gathered 200 new army warriors and gave them to Lei Chuandeng, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division. Commander Lei, it would be best if this succeeds. If it doesn't, you must protect the safety of the two generals. I will bring the army to provide support outside the palace. Rest assured, I will complete the mission. After the tall and mighty Lei Chuandeng gave a military salute, he took off his 5-star army uniform and changed into the uniform of the Kazakh soldiers. After everything was prepared, under Daichin's familiar guidance, he brought 50 guards, plus Lei Chuandeng and Toljan's 200 guards, a total of 253 people to the temporary palace of the Turpan kingdom. The king was a king. Even if the donkey didn't fall, it wouldn't fall. Even though Turpan had already lost a large amount of land and people, and even their country, after arriving in Khaleesi, under Hardenbarter's orders, they quickly built a new palace. Even though it wasn't as glorious as before due to the lack of time, it still took up a lot of space. Just from the outside, they had to go through 3 gates and 3 checks before they could enter. With Daichin leading the way, they were naturally unobstructed. At this moment in the palace hall, King Hardenbarter was waiting to meet with Kaliai. Beside Hardenbarter, Generals Tushi and Gengel stood on the left and right. From time to time, they would stretch their necks and look outside the hall. Clearly, they were a bit anxious. What's going on? Didn't you say that everyone was here? Why isn't he here yet? Finally, Hardenbarter's eyes showed a trace of annoyance. No matter what, he was still the king of a country. Even though Kaliai came to help him, it wasn't right to make him wait for so long. Seeing that the king's tone was a bit unhappy, the 2 generals on the side lowered their heads and didn't dare to make a sound. This new king was not as good-tempered as the old King Saiza, especially now that the army was constantly retreating. Just yesterday, one of his servants was dragged out to be beheaded because he accidentally broke a piece of porcelain. With this as an example, everyone had to be more careful. No one answered his question, so Kelly coldly snorted. He didn't want to cause trouble for the two generals. After all, he still needed them to defend the city. After waiting for a while, when Hardenbarter's face showed his annoyance again, a palace servant finally ran in and knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, General Daichin is back. Together with him is General Toljan of the Kazakh kingdom. Finally, they're here. Hardenbarter quickly sat up straight. At the same time, he was a bit confused. Didn't Kelly come? Why didn't he come to see me? With this question in mind, when Daichin and Toljan entered the heavily guarded hall, Hardenbarter asked, "Why don't I see General Kelly?" Toljan, who had long prepared his speech, put his right hand in front of his chest and maintained his customary etiquette. Honorable King of Turpan, our General Kelly caught a cold and is now resting in the army. After saying this, Thorjen shut his mouth. Then he looked around and began to observe the environment in the hall. When he saw 8 armored turban soldiers around the hall and 2 tiger generals beside King Hardenbarth, he knew that it was impossible to use the strategy of capturing the leader first to catch the bandits. Now, he could only find an opportunity to rush out after Daichin said what he wanted. Luckily, Lei Chuan led more than 200 warriors outside the hall to support him. As long as he was fast enough, there shouldn't be any danger. As for whether General Daichin's persuasion would succeed, he didn't have any hope. Toljan closed his mouth and it was Daichin's turn to speak. He needed to find an excuse for being late, so he said, "Your Majesty, General Kelly is indeed not feeling well. Luckily, I've already asked after him on behalf of Your Majesty. Please forgive me for being late." "I see. Everything is right." Hardenbarter nodded without thinking too much. Soon, he asked what he wanted to ask, "Is General Kelly all right? It won't affect our cooperation to deal with the 5 Stars army, right?" At this moment, Daichin had a headache because of this question. Now that the 5-star army had already entered the city, the destruction of Turban was inevitable. The only difference was that fewer soldiers and civilians would die. This was also the reason why he had to make this trip. He wanted to use his own efforts to protect the lives of more soldiers and civilians, thinking that because of his actions, he might be able to save a lot of people. He gathered his courage and said to Hardenbarter, "Your Majesty, do you think that even if we join forces with the 100,000 Kazakh soldiers, we can really stop the powerful 5-star army?" Just as he was waiting for a definite answer, Daichin suddenly said this. Hardenbarter's expression changed again and again. He didn't understand why this important official would say such a thing. Of course, he couldn't answer this question, but did he have a choice? "General Daichin, what do you mean? Do you not think that our 2 armies can work together?" Hardenbarter didn't understand and asked back. He didn't think that Daichin would answer this question very straightforwardly. "Yes, Your Majesty, I don't think so. In my opinion, even if we join forces with General Kelly, we won't be able to change the situation. If we do that, we will just be throwing away the lives of innocent soldiers and civilians." The sudden answer stunned Tushi and General Gengel, who were standing on both sides of the room. They didn't think that their subordinate General Daichin would see the situation in front of them like this. Although they were also terrified of the arrival of the 5-star army and didn't have much confidence in winning, they shouldn't be so pessimistic. Hardenbarter, who was sitting on the throne, also had his eyes wide open. After a few breaths, his chest heaved as he asked, "Daichin, what do you mean by that? Are you going to surrender to the 5-star army?" It was no wonder that Hardenbarter would think like this. This was too obvious a discussion about surrendering to the enemy. Anyone else would think too much. Chapter 1302. Of course, Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin's loyalty. After all, during this period of time, this person had been supporting him. If this person had already surrendered to the 5-star army, the situation would have been much worse. Hardenbarter didn't doubt Daichin, he just said this out of anger. But after he said this, what he didn't expect was that Daichin actually admitted to it. He first nodded and then said with a very certain tone, "Yes, Your Majesty, your servant has already surrendered to the 5-star army." Now, the 5-star army has already disguised themselves as the Kazakh army and entered the city. This time, your servant came to persuade your majesty to surrender. Please don't fight for the sake of the soldiers and the people. Otherwise, you will only lose more miserably and even lose your life. As if he was afraid that Hardenbarter wouldn't give him a chance to speak, Daiqin spoke very quickly and clearly. He could guarantee that he would say everything he wanted to say in a very short period of time. Hardenbarter could also hear it very clearly. This was also a test for people. And with every sentence that Daiqin said, Hardenbarter's face became more and more ugly. When Daiqin finished speaking, his face was already as gloomy as water. His murderous eyes stared at Daiqin again and again as if he wanted to get to know this person again. Then he suddenly roared, "Innocent? How can there be innocent people in a war? Since they are the generals and citizens of Turkmenistan, they should protect this country with this king. If this king is no longer here, there is no need for them to continue living. You, on the other hand, have been put in an important position by this king, but now you are actually helping others. How disappointing." After saying this, Hardenbarter suddenly raised his right hand and pointed at Daiqin. "You are a person without a king or father. Come, take down this cowardly person for this king." The 8 palace guards standing on the left and right of the palace immediately responded and rushed towards where Daiqin was standing. Just as they started to move, a short wooden table flew over and blocked the path of the imperial bodyguards. Naturally, it was Thorjen who did it. He had been observing the environment in the hall and was prepared to make a move at any time. Just as the guards agreed, he stared at the small wooden table that was originally prepared for Kellyai. He reached out with both hands, picked it up, and threw it out with force. Taking advantage of the flying wooden table, Thorjen grabbed Daiqin's hand and quickly retreated until he reached the main door of the palace and kicked it open. 2 silhouettes also quickly rushed out. "Catch them, we can't let them escape." Seeing that Daiqin and the other person were about to escape, Hardenbarter's eyes turned red as if they were spitting fire. Under his shouts, the 8 palace guards rushed out together. At this moment, Lei Chuan, who was in charge of receiving them from outside the palace, was also prepared. The moment he saw Daiqin and the other person rush out, he pulled out his sword and slashed towards the palace guard closest to him, who was completely defenseless. As Lei Chuandang made his move, it was like a signal. The dozens of warriors behind him all pulled out their swords and rushed towards different targets. In an instant, blood splashed everywhere and the palace became a mess. "Let's go!" Thorjen quickly pulled Daiqin back to Lei Chuandang's side and took a sword from him, holding it horizontally in front of him as he yelled. Lei Chuandang didn't need Thorjen to say anything to know that they couldn't stay here any longer. Because in his vision, there were already countless guards rushing towards them. He slashed forward with his sword and pushed back a palace guard. At the same time, he shouted to all his subordinates, "Retreat, kill a path of blood." The dozens of warriors said in unison. Then, they turned around and retreated according to the path they came from. At this moment, not only in the courtyard, but also at the 3 gates of the palace, it was already a mess. Along the way, Lei Chuandang's group had more than 100 brothers at the gates of the top 3 academies. There were exactly 60 people at each intersection. When chaos broke out in the palace, these 180 warriors immediately pulled out their blades and slashed at the palace guards beside them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Lei Chuan and his men charged out of the courtyard and arrived in front of the first gate. They met up with the soldiers of the 5-star army and continued to charge out. With every step they took, someone would fall beside them. With every step they took, there would be a palace guard who would be killed by a blade. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and chase after them." Seeing that Daiqin still hadn't arrived in front of him, Hardenbarter felt that something was wrong. With a face full of anger, he yelled at Tushi and Zhengzhel who were standing at the 2 sides. The 2 generals seemed to have just woken up. They replied loudly and prepared to leave. Hardenbarter's yell caused the 2 to involuntarily stop. What did Daiqin just say? He said that the 5-star army disguised themselves as Kazakh cavalry and already infiltrated the city? Doesn't this mean that the city is no longer safe? You two don't need to chase anymore. This king will give you the tiger troop talisman. Immediately dispatch the troops and kill all the Kazakh cavalry that just entered the city. Hurry. As he spoke, Hardenbarter reached into his pocket and took out 2 tiger troop talismans. He gave them to Tushi and Genjel. The 2 generals bowed and quickly left after receiving the tiger troop talismans. However, at this moment, Hardenbarter, who was extremely angry, didn't think too much about it. Even if Daiqin could betray him, were these 2 generals really that trustworthy? Were they really that loyal? Battle cries rang out from the palace. The 5-star army soldiers who were already prepared outside the palace seemed to have heard a signal. They all shouted loudly and then rushed over with swords and spears. They quickly opened the palace gates and received Lei Chuandang and the others. At this time, the Turpan soldiers who received the news gathered more and more troops to protect their king. Retreat from here first and regroup with the army at the south gate. We will make a decision then. After Lei Chuandang met up with the soldiers, he immediately gave the order. The group of people quickly left this place. Right after they left, Tushi and Genjel each brought a group of soldiers and appeared here. However, they didn't have the intention to chase after Daiqin. Instead, they split up and went towards the east and west barracks. Tushi really went to mobilize troops. He was once a defeated general and Hardenbarter didn't abandon him. Naturally, he was very loyal and wanted to show off. However, the other general, Genjel, didn't think so. It wasn't that he wasn't loyal enough. On the contrary, he was very loyal. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Daiqin and promoted. Yes, Genjel was the one who was promoted by General Daiqin. It was because of this that he was greatly affected by what happened in the palace just now. According to his understanding, his benefactor, Daiqin, was a reasonable person and a person who loved his soldiers. Since even he thought that he would lose this battle, he had no choice but to think about the future. Everyone was afraid of death, not to mention a meaningless death. Genjel was also afraid of death. However, if it was on the battlefield and his skills were inferior, he would die without regrets. However, if he were to die in such a muddle-headed manner, and even be scolded after his death, such a death was not something he wanted to see. Gejiner's footsteps became slower and slower as he walked towards the east camp. After hurriedly passing through 2 more streets, he suddenly stopped and looked at his most trusted bodyguard beside him and asked, Are you afraid of death?" The soldier was stunned by this question. After a moment of hesitation, he immediately shook his head. "General, I'm not afraid of death." "Good, then I'll give you a mission. Go quickly." Lei Chuandang and his group had already retreated to the south gate under the protection of the 5-star army cavalry. There were soldiers of the new army everywhere. Retreating here also meant that they were safe. Suhi saw how embarrassed they were and knew that persuasion wouldn't work. He shook his head and said, "It seems that your mission has failed. Since it's like this, then we can only fight. General Daiqin, this time you have nothing to say." Daiqin's face was red. He wanted to say something, but the matter of persuading the king had already failed. In order to protect him, he had also lost dozens of 5-star army brothers. At this moment he really didn't know what to say. Sometimes silence was a kind of silent agreement. General Su, he nodded. "Good, since it's like this, immediately use the radio to contact the 4th Army Regiment outside the North Gate. Tell them to prepare to bombard the gate and kill our way into the city. When the time comes, we'll kill our way to the north and south." "Sir." After hearing Suhi's order, the soldiers immediately responded loudly and turned to leave the tent. At this moment, the tent flap opened and a messenger walked in. He looked at Suhi and saluted, then said loudly, "General, there's a Turpan soldier outside the tent. He says he's Genjel's soldier and has important matters to discuss with General Daiqin." "Genjel's soldier, why don't you let him in?" Daiqin said as he looked at Suhi with a pleading expression. Suhi also wanted to see what this person wanted. He nodded and said, "Okay, let him in." Soon, under the guidance of the messenger, a soldier wearing a Turpan uniform walked into the tent. He first looked around and after seeing General Dai Qin, he knelt down and said, "General, our general invites you to his camp. He says he has important matters to discuss." Chapter 1303. Dai Qin had some impression of the soldier in front of him and confirmed that he was someone who always followed beside Zhenzhou. After confirming his identity and knowing that he wanted to meet him, Dai Qin quickly made a decision. He had already made his intentions very clear in the main hall just now, and Zhenzhou was also present at that time. He already knew of his opinion and now he still wanted to meet him. What was the meaning of this? Could it be that he agreed with his opinion? Did he call me over this time just to discuss something related to this matter? In just a few breaths of time, Dai Qin thought of many things and decided to take the risk. But just as he was about to nod his head, Su He had already answered for him, "No, General Dai Qin won't go. Who knows if your general is trying to trick us?" Right, you can't go. It's too dangerous." Su He's words attracted everyone's agreement. This wasn't to say that everyone was trying to curry favor with him because of his high position, but this was what everyone truly thought. I should go." Just when everyone was disagreeing, Dai Qin opened his mouth with a determined look on his face. As if he was afraid that others would misunderstand or disagree, Dai Qin explained, "This General Zhenzhou is different from the others. He was personally promoted by me and I know his personality well. He definitely wouldn't do something despicable like lying to others. I think he wants to join us and called me over to discuss something important. Now that I'm no longer around, the military authority of the East and West armies will definitely be given to these people. This is an army of tens of thousands. In order for these people to join the 5-star army, I think this risk is worth taking." Dai Qin looked at Su He as he spoke, his expression unwavering. Since he had already decided to stop the war and give more soldiers and civilians a way out, then he had to finish the good deed. Even if he had to die, he wouldn't hesitate. Since he had already taken the risk, Su He originally didn't want to agree. After all, Dai Qin was still of great use. There were 300,000 civilians and 100,000 soldiers in for Akashi City. It was impossible to kill them all. In the end, to pacify these people, the local general had to do the work. No matter if it was in terms of experience or influence, Dai Qin was the best choice to settle these problems. Once something happened to him, a lot of things would be difficult to do. This was also why Yang Chendong ordered the CIA to spend a lot of effort to control Dai Qin's family. From the looks of it, the effect was excellent. Not only was this person worried about the safety of his family, but he was also worried about the safety of the soldiers and civilians in the city. That was why he agreed to work for him. At this time, if something were to happen, wouldn't all their previous work be for nothing? At the same time, Su He knew that Dai Qin's words made sense. If Zhenzhou really wanted to surrender, it would be a pity to give up this opportunity. This meant that not only would they not have the cooperation of tens of thousands of soldiers, they would also have to face tens of thousands more enemies. The difference between the two was too great. Su He was a bit hesitant, but Dai Qin said firmly, "Commander Su, please give me a chance. Based on my understanding of Zhenzhou, even if he doesn't choose to surrender, he won't threaten my safety. Please believe me. Tell everyone to leave. I have something to tell you in private." Su He finally agreed. Even if she agreed, if Zhenzhou also chose to surrender, she would have to give him some benefits and guarantees. This kind of thing was not suitable to be discussed in public. Instead, it needed to be discussed in private. After about 15 minutes, Dai Qin walked out of the tent and left with the soldier. When he left, he only brought 4 bodyguards with him to protect his own safety. Because if the opponent had any bad intentions, it would be useless no matter how many soldiers he brought. "Commander, what should we do?" Seeing Dai Qin leave, Lei Chuandang and the rest came to Su He to ask for instructions. "Let's wait for a while." "Oh right. Immediately send a message to the 1st Regiment of the 4th Division to not fire the cannons on the city gate. Wait for our news." Su He decided to believe in Dai Qin this time. Maybe he would bring back some good news. Even if things didn't work out, they had already entered the city and couldn't be kicked out. At most, they would just kill a few people. After Daichin followed the soldier to the east camp, he saw Zhengzhel waiting for him at the entrance. When he saw that Daichin not only came, but also only brought 4 soldiers with him, Zhengzhel's face revealed a trace of joy. When they came in front of him, he took the initiative to bow. Subordinate greets General. From Zhengzhel's greeting, one could see his attitude. To this, Daichin also said emotionally, "General, please rise." "Thank you, General." Zhengzhel immediately stood up and said sincerely, "General, please come into the tent for a chat." "Okay, lead the way." Daichin's body had already relaxed. If it was a blessing, it wouldn't be a disaster. If it was a disaster, it couldn't be avoided. Very quickly, the 2 of them entered the tent. When there were only the 2 of them in the tent, Zhengzhel knelt on the ground. "General, I didn't think that you would really come, and only bring 4 soldiers with you. Your trust in me makes me feel ashamed and touched. Quickly get up. Speaking of which, I was the one who promoted you. I think I know you well. Speak, this time you brought me here, do you have something to say?" At this moment, Daichin had already made up his mind. If the other party really wanted to harm him, there was no need for him to kneel now. Daichin went straight to the point. Zhengzhel, who got up, didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was still thinking about how to start. After waiting for a while, Zhengzhel still didn't speak. Daichin knew that he had to say something to increase the stakes. He said, "Okay, if you have something to say, then say it quickly. To be honest, the 5-star army didn't agree to you coming here. If you don't go back for a long time, I'm afraid that something will happen. At that time, it will be very bad for you." Zhengzhel, who was still hesitating, didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He opened his mouth and said, "General, did the 5-star army really enter the city?" Finally, they came to the main topic. Daichin didn't hide anything and said, "That's right. They destroyed the 100,000 Kazakh cavalry and disguised themselves as them to enter the city. Now, they have already taken over the south gate. We can't beat them away." What? The 100,000 Kazakh army was defeated? It was the first time he heard this news. After hearing it, Zhengzhel's face changed. Speaking of which, the 100,000 reinforcements were the hope of Turpan turning the situation around. He didn't think that even this hope would be destroyed. It seemed that he didn't have any other choice. "Yes, I've already seen General Kelly. Think about it, even he has become a captive of the 5-star army, the fate of the 100,000 reinforcements can be imagined." Daichin nodded his head heavily, giving a clear answer on this point. After knowing the truth, Zhengzhel knew that the situation had changed. He was even more glad for his decision. Of course, he was also grateful to Daichin. He originally thought that if he sent out an invitation, Daichin wouldn't dare to come. If that was the case, then he didn't have any other choice. The only thing he could do was to listen to the king's orders and send out troops. But now, since Daichin came, he obviously had another choice. "General, what do you think I should do next?" Although his question was a little vague, his words already expressed his thoughts. Daichin was relieved after hearing it. "Zhengzhel, I've already reported your situation to the new army commander of the 5-star army. He arranged it like this." At this moment, Tushi was mobilizing troops in the west camp. Holding the military seal given by King Harden Barter, he now had control over 70,000 troops. Originally, he had an army of 160,000. Other than the 5,000 outside the north and south gates, 10,000 inside the city, and 70,000 in the east camp, the 70,000 in his hands were the most important. When he thought about having such an important military power, General Tushi was very happy. He thought that his chance to show off had come. The opportunity to lose the Battle of Ayla Mountain Pass would also appear. But what he didn't expect was that this happiness didn't last for too long. It was interrupted when a scout entered the tent and reported, "General, the latest news, Zhengzhel surrendered to the 5-star army and sent people to open the north gate. Right now, the 5-star army outside the north gate has already entered the city. A portion of the cavalry is already charging towards our west camp." The scout knelt on the ground and reported anxiously, "General Tushi, who was originally happy and wanted to make a big contribution, heard the news and his expression changed greatly. Genjil's surrender was tantamount to completely overturning the balance of strength on the battlefield, making it difficult for him to see any hope of victory. Now in Firlice City, the enemy had occupied 3 of the 4 cities. Only his west gate was still in his hands. He absolutely couldn't lose it. He couldn't afford to lose it. Like this, let the soldiers withdraw their forces and guard the gate. Don't worry about other places. If anyone wants to approach the west gate, just shoot them with bows and arrows. Also, immediately mobilize a group of troops. I'm going to the palace to pick up His Majesty and leave here immediately. After quickly making a decision, Tushi took a group of 2,000 elite cavalry and went straight to the palace from the west gate. He found King Hardenbarter, who was still sitting there and waiting for news. Time was of the essence. After Tushi saw King Harden, he knelt on the ground and gave a brief introduction of the situation. Then he said loudly, "Your Majesty, Firlice City is no longer safe. For your Majesty's safety, please follow me out of the city to take refuge." Chapter 1304. Genjil had also rebelled. This result struck Hardenbarter like a bolt of lightning. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The feeling of being betrayed by his friends and family made him feel like a ball of fire was burning in his heart, and he wanted to vent it. Damn it, they all deserve to die. This king has treated them well. Why did they betray me? General Tushi, why do you think this happened? Hardenbarter, who seemed to be a little neurotic, shouted for a long time. If it was any other time, in the face of the king's anger, Tushi could only kneel at the side and endure. But now, time waits for no one. He could tolerate the king's actions, but his enemies wouldn't. If he waited any longer, once the encirclement was completed, it would be impossible for him to escape. Tushi, who was kneeling on the ground, gritted his teeth and finally did something that shouldn't be done by a subject, but it was the most appropriate action. Come, lift His Majesty up and invite His Majesty out of the palace. This order made the cavalrymen who came with Tushi look at each other. They didn't dare to make any excessive moves in front of the crazy king. Instead, the palace guards approved of this order. They quickly rushed forward and lifted Hardenbarter up and rushed out of the palace. Leaving with them were the concubines of the imperial harem, as well as several young princes and princesses. Half an hour after Tushi left, Commander Su he led a large number of cavalrymen to the temporary palace. But at this time, the palace was empty and the king was nowhere to be seen. After a careful search, other than some palace maids who were kneeling and trembling in fear, there wasn't a single member of the royal family. General Daichin shook his head regretfully. It seems that His Majesty has left first. Left? Su he shook his head and said in a very certain tone. They can't run away. Come, immediately interrogate these palace maids and ask them who took Hardenbarter away. Faced with the fierce-looking, burly and murderous new Third Army Cavalry, the palace maids naturally answered all the questions. Soon, they told the story of Tushi's appearance here and taking the king away. This was within Su he's expectations. When he heard that the king left, but because he left in a hurry, he left all his belongings in the palace. He called the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, and told him to send a large number of troops to guard the palace. He also reported this matter to Yang Chendong outside the city. Then he said to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandeng, immediately lead the army to attack the west gate. It's best if we can capture Hardenbarter, but if we can't, we have to drive them out of the city. When they get out of the city, there will naturally be people to stop them. In this way, Chang Bo of the 4th Cavalry Division attacked from the south gate, Lei Chuandang attacked from the palace to the west gate, Zhenger's surrendered troops attacked from the east gate, and the 1st Regiment of the 4th Cavalry Division and the Far Eastern Army Cavalry Division attacked from the north gate. At this point, apart from the west gate, most of the city was occupied by the 5-star army. At the west gate, Tushi forcefully took Hardenbarter back to the barracks. At this time, the young king's emotions had also gradually calmed down. Although he still had some doubts in his heart, Now was not the time to think about these things. What he had to do next was the most important thing. General Tushi, what do you plan to do next? After gradually calming down, Hardenbarter looked at Tushi, who was the last important official by his side, and asked with a hopeful expression. Your Majesty, I have 2 suggestions. The first is to stay in the city and use your Majesty's name to fuse with the army to resist. We should strive to regain the command of the city and drive the 5-star army out of the city. However, this is not easy to accomplish. The second is to immediately leave the city. Where there is life, there is hope. As long as your Majesty is still here, you can shake your arm at any time and rebuild the mountains and rivers. As for where we should go, your Majesty, please make the final decision. Tushi cupped his fist and said carefully. The first suggestion was definitely a good one. Once the 5-star army was chased out of the city, it would be equivalent to resolving a crisis. With the 300,000 citizens in the city, perhaps they would be able to use them to form an army with a decent number of soldiers. However, it was obvious that with Daichin and Genjil's betrayal, and the 5-star army's cavalry entering the city, it would be quite difficult to do this. If they did not do it well, they would be trapped here. And from the looks of it, this possibility was very high. Although the second suggestion was to give up a large number of civilians and even soldiers, if they wanted to break out, they couldn't bring too many soldiers. Firstly, they needed to leave people to guard the west gate. Secondly, if they had too many people, they would be a big target. The chances of them being discovered and caught would also be very high. In this way, it was equivalent to giving up too many things, which made one's heart ache. However, by doing this, they would be able to stay away from danger, and the chances of them rising would also be very high. After a moment of hesitation, Hardenbarter was worthy of being an ambitious king. He quickly made the decision to leave the city like a gecko cutting off its tail. Let's leave the city. Just like the general said, where there is life, there is hope. How about this? You go and make the arrangements. We don't need to bring too many cavalrymen, only 5,000 elite cavalrymen will be enough. You also arrange for the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen to go out of the west gate with us. After that, we will go our separate ways to confuse the 5-star army's cavalrymen. Good, your Majesty is wise. I will go and make the preparations. Tushi sighed at Hardenbarter's cleverness and immediately flattered him. Then he went to make the preparations. This plan involved selecting soldiers and convincing some generals to stay here. The workload wasn't small. Tushi busied himself for a while and only managed to settle the matter after half an hour. When there were still some details to be completed, a piece of news came which made Tushi unable to sit still. He left the unfinished work and brought the selected 11,000 cavalrymen to Hardenbarter. Your Majesty, there's news from the periphery. A group of cavalrymen from the 5-star army has arrived at the western gate of the city. They're charging towards us right now. We need to leave immediately. Good, is everything done? Hardenbarter naturally knew that there was no time to lose. This time, he didn't go crazy and didn't ask pretentiously. Everything is done. Among the 11,000 cavalry, we will leave 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to protect your Majesty. The remaining 6,000 cavalry will be divided into 3 groups to confuse the enemy. Tushi answered very happily. That's great. Let's go. General Tushi, this king didn't misjudge you. Once this king returns here in the future, there will be many benefits for you. At that time, your entire family will be proud of your choice today. At this moment, Hardenbarter, who could only rely on Tushi, immediately made a heavy promise. In response, a look of excitement flashed across Tushi's face. He knelt down and said, "The Tushi clan is willing to go through fire and water for your Majesty's safety. We are willing to risk our lives for the re-emergence of Tulyafin." Good, we will leave immediately. Hardenbarter laughed heartily. Although there were too many unexpected things this time, no matter what, as long as he could escape, there would be new hope. In this way, the rise of East Mountain wasn't impossible. At that time, he would retaliate against anyone who betrayed him by 10 times or even 100 times. He would let everyone know the consequences of offending him, Hardenbarter. The 11,000 cavalry quickly left the west gate under Tushi's arrangement. When this news reached the ears of the Turpan generals who were arranged to stay behind, many of them couldn't help but curse. After all, even the king and the general had left. They had become rootless trees. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, they would only die if they continued to resist. There were also some generals who had a contemplative look after hearing this news. As the saying goes, every man for himself and the devil takes the hindmost. Even the king and the general had left. They also needed to plan and consider their future. Was it really a wise choice to lead their troops to resist the 5-star army? Tushi couldn't care less about the considerations of these generals. He led 5,000 cavalrymen to protect Hardenbarder, the royal family, and the core members of his family and quickly left the city. He then waved his hand and the other 3 groups of 2,000 cavalrymen each left in different directions. At this point, no one knew which direction was safer. The so-called choice was just to resign themselves to fate. However, compared to the other soldiers who stayed in the city to fend off the 5-star army, it was clear that their chances of survival were higher. Looking at the 3 groups of 6,000 cavalry leaving in different directions, Tushi let out a long sigh and loudly issued the order to set off. They followed the previously planned route and went straight to Boston Lake in the west. As long as they could go around the lake, they would be able to enter the vast Kuruktag mountain range. Once they entered, they would be like birds flying in the sky. It would be difficult to find them. After Suhi's telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, he immediately ordered the light cavalry regiment of the 5-star army and the reconnaissance regiment, who were about to enter through the north gate, to go around the west gate and intercept Hardenbarder, who might escape through this route. Not only that, Yang Chendong, who was supposed to enter the city, also led 2,000 black cavalry from the south gate to the west gate and joined in the pursuit and interception of Hardenbarder's escape. Beta Persei was somewhat worried about Yang Chendong's decision. They only had 2,000 black cavalry. They didn't know how many cavalry were protecting Hardenbarder. If the other party had too many people, would they be surrounded? Chapter 1305. Beta Persei couldn't help but say to Yang Chendong, "Young master, we only have 2,000 cavalry. You can't get involved so easily. But don't you have confidence in the combat effectiveness of the black cavalry?" Yang Chendong looked sideways at Beta Persei. When he said this, he did not avoid it at all. Instead, his tone was a little heavier so that the black cavalry around him could hear it very clearly. At that moment, after the voice was heard, the black cavalry stared at Beta Persei with an unfriendly look. As Yang Chendong's personal guards, the black cavalry was an extremely arrogant existence. How could such an army tolerate being looked down upon and looked down upon by others? Even if the person who said this was Beta Persei, it still made them very angry. Being stared at like this made Yang Heir feel like he was being cut by 1,000 blades. He bitterly smiled and said, "Young master, I don't dare to have such thoughts. I just think that for safety reasons, we can transfer some cavalry to complete this mission with us. For example, the 5th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division that hasn't entered the city yet. After all, one more person means one more force." With such an explanation, the murderous gazes became less fierce. Beta Persei could not help but wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. Just now, the momentum and pressure were so great that he almost couldn't bear it. Yang Chendong naturally understood Beta Persei and knew that this was also for his own safety. He thought that only transferring the 5th Regiment would not affect the overall situation and would not have any impact on cleaning up the city, so he nodded and agreed. "Well, go and arrange for Wang Shan to report. Black Cavalry, let's go. Let's go." The Black Cavalry shouted excitedly. After all, there was going to be a war soon, and those were all military merits. How could they not be excited? Just like that, when Hardenbarder sent out 3 feints to help him escape, Yang Chendong also arranged for 3 cavalry regiments to pursue. As for whether they could catch up or not, that would depend on luck. In the end, it was clear that Hardenbarder's luck was not good. After receiving the order, The scouting group, the light cavalry group, and the 5th World Cavalry Regiment found the 3 faint armies outside the west side of the city, a total of 6,000 cavalry. They easily killed over 1,000 people and learned that Hardenbarter had escaped with 5,000 cavalry. They reported this to Yang Chendong. The Black Cavalry's equipment was too heavy. In terms of speed, they were far slower than the other 3 cavalry units. That was why Yang Chendong had received this information before he even reached the battlefield. Afterward, he asked someone to bring him a map. After observing it for a while, his eyes fell on Boston Lake. In his opinion, if he was Hardenbarter, he would definitely choose to go around the lake. This was the best route. Come on, change direction. Don't go to the west gate, go to the lake. At the same time, send out cavalry scouts to expand the search area. At this moment, Hardenbarter naturally didn't know that the 3 cavalry units he sent out had been taken down. He didn't have a transcendental communication device like a radio station in his hands. Right now, he was still walking around in the dark. It wasn't exactly casual. They still had a goal, and that was to go around Boston Lake. It was just that this lake was not small. They had already walked for more than 3 hours, but they were only halfway there. This was also because there were too many people holding them back. For example, the concubines of the royal family. They were women and weren't good at riding horses. At this moment, they were sitting in several carriages. Because of their presence, the speed of the team naturally slowed down. In this regard, Tushi was naturally anxious in his heart, but he didn't dare to say anything disrespectful. Not only were there concubines in the carriages, but there were also 3 little princes and 2 little princesses. They were existences that he couldn't afford to offend. The team walked like this, neither fast nor slow. But it seemed that good people were blessed by the heavens. They didn't encounter any enemies along the way. Seeing that the sky was already dark, they had already completed 4/5 of their goal of going around Boston Lake. It seemed that victory was in front of them. General Tushi, it's getting late. Should we find a place to rest? After all, we have been on the road for more than half a day. Everyone is a little tired. Hardenbarter, who insisted on riding on the horse and didn't sit in the carriage, asked with a face full of sweat. After all, he was a king. Staying in the palace every day and neglecting his training, he suddenly rushed for a few hours. Now, he could only feel a tearing pain in the muscles of his legs. If it was not for the face of the king, he would have crawled into the carriage to enjoy the massage and care of the concubines. Naturally, Tushi had already seen Hardenbarter's performance on the horse. He had thought more than once about whether he should remind the king to get into the carriage to rest. However, considering that this might embarrass the king, it would not look good on his face, so he endured it. Now that he heard the king's words, he knew that the other party really couldn't endure it anymore. Considering that they didn't see the cavalry of the 5-star army chasing after them, there shouldn't be any problems. Tushi nodded and agreed. Okay, then we will stop and rest. Your Majesty, you also know that we haven't completely escaped to a safe place yet. Hardenbarter just wanted to rest. As for when they would set off, he didn't care. This was because he had already made up his mind. This time, he wouldn't come out of the carriage. He nodded and said, okay, I will listen to the general. Just like this, before they completely escaped from the dangerous area, the group stopped. This action also destroyed Hardenbarter's last hope and possibility of escaping. At this moment, Yang Chendong's 2,000 black cavalry were walking in a valley 30 li away. The cavalry outpost he sent was less than 10 li away from Hardenbarter. Even if that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to discover the other party in the pitch-black night. However, as the ruler of a country, Hardenbarter was not used to eating dry food and insisted on making a fire to eat hot food. As a result, the bonfire was dazzling and bright in the dark night. It was because of the fire that the outpost of the black cavalry discovered them. They quickly sent someone to report to the main force behind. There's a bonfire and a carriage? Yang Chendong's eyes lit up when he heard the news from the outpost of the black cavalry. Although it wasn't very accurate, it still made him excited. If it was just an ordinary cavalry, there shouldn't be a carriage accompanying them. Since it appeared, It was very likely that it was their target. Considering that Hardenbarter had sent a total of 3 feints and they had all fallen into his hands, the last remaining cavalry was very likely the final target. Young master, this new discovery is very likely our target. Beta Persei's reaction wasn't slow. He thought for a while and smiled. Yes, the possibility is very high. But whether it is or not, since we have encountered them, they can't escape. Pass down the order. 500 people in a group and surround them from all sides. Yang Chendong also smiled and gave the order. At that moment, First Captain Chiovi was in a group, Second Captain Dao Xiao was in a group, Beta Persei was in a group, and Yang Chendong was in a group with Deputy Captain Ba Daojiang in a group. The 2,000 black cavalry split into 4 groups and headed straight for the lakeside, forming an encirclement that wrapped around Hardenbarter's end. The 2,000 well-trained black cavalry were not very fast. Since their target had stopped moving, they had too much time to surround him. Because they weren't fast, they didn't make the slightest sound when they moved. After a few hours, a red light appeared on the horizon. When the sky was about to brighten, they had completely surrounded Hardenbarter. When the sky was about to brighten, General Tushi walked out of the barracks in a suit of armor. Then, there were continuous shouts. The 5,000 black cavalry got up one after another and began to prepare breakfast before leaving. But at this moment, a sentry on the periphery ran over in a panic and knelt in front of Tushi. General, something bad has happened, something bad has happened. Why are you so panicked? Tushi's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, his heart began to beat faster, but in order to stabilize the morale of the army, he didn't show the slightest abnormality on his face. Although this calmness was concealed very well, it was soon completely destroyed by the sentry's next sentence. General, we have been surrounded. There are cavalry outside, all cavalry. What did you say? Where did the cavalry come from? At this time, Tushi couldn't care less about the image of a general. He stretched out his arm and grabbed the sentry's neck. There was a trace of trembling in his voice. General, this subordinate doesn't dare to lie to you. There are cavalry outside, and they are cavalry covered in black armor. If they only reveal their eyes. They look very frightening, very frightening. The sentry's face was already pale with fright. He stammered, but in the end he recounted the situation he knew. Covered in black armor, could it be the black cavalry? General Tushi, who was more knowledgeable than ordinary soldiers, trembled when he heard this. Then, there was an unconcealable fear in his eyes. If what the sentry said was true, then it would be difficult for them to escape this time even if they had wings. It was the black cavalry, the legendary strongest existence of the 5-star army. Their armor was impenetrable, and their blades were invincible. Every target targeted by them would be like being targeted by a pack of wolves. In the end, they would be torn apart without leaving behind any residue. When he thought of these terrifying consequences, although the weather was still very cold at dawn, Tushi's body was already covered in layers of hot sweat. Moreover, the sweat involuntarily dripped down from his forehead. Chapter 1306. What happened in the camp also alarmed Hardenbarter, who was still resting in the carriage. He sent a guard to ask what happened. Tushi came to the carriage with a pale face and reported through the curtain. Your Majesty, something bad has happened. We have been discovered and surrounded. It seems to be Bugnam of Gojoseon's black cavalry. What? Surrounded? Black cavalry? Hardenbarter's voice was trembling when he said these words. Obviously, he was also frightened by this news. At this time, he began to regret. If he knew this would happen, he would have thought of a way to escape last night no matter how tired he was. But now, it was too late to say anything. Thinking that once they were caught by the 5-star army, they would suffer a fate worse than death. Hardenbarter grabbed the Tushi general's arm as if he was grasping at a life-saving straw. Can we break out of the encirclement? Tushi wanted to say that it was impossible. This time, they were facing the black cavalry, the most powerful existence in the 5-star army. But after seeing Hardenbarter's hopeful eyes, he endured and didn't say the worst result. Instead, he swallowed his saliva and said, "No matter what, this minister will do his best." But Hardenbarter didn't know that Tushi was being perfunctory. He said with some excitement, "Then I will leave everything to General Tushi. Don't worry, as long as this king can break out of the encirclement, I will take good care of your family." This was to let Tushi stay behind to cover the retreat. This also showed Hardenbarter's selfish side. In his eyes, his own safety was always the most important. As for others, they could be sacrificed at any time. If the king wanted the minister to die, the minister had no choice but to die. Tushi had no other choice but to nod heavily. "Your Majesty, please rest assured, this minister will do his best to delay them." The next step was simple. Tushi led 3,000 cavalry to fight against 2,000 black cavalry. Under the protection of the remaining 2,000 cavalry, Hardenbarter led a group of royal family members to break out of the encirclement, trying to kill their way out. As long as Hardenbarter didn't die, the Turpan kingdom wouldn't be considered dead. There was still hope. The Black Knight Dragon Guards that were slowly approaching from the periphery did not immediately launch an attack. It was as if they were playing a game of eagle-catching chicks, constantly shrinking the encirclement. The black cavalry was fully clad in black armor. Even their warhorses were covered in black armor. Only their eyes were exposed. They gave off a very eerie and terrifying feeling. The sky was already bright, and when their line of sight wasn't obstructed, the appearance of the invincible black army was a great deterrent to the Turkopan cavalry. Before the battle even began, many of the Turkmen cavalry were already worried. Would they be a match for the black cavalry? The Tushi general also felt a chill in his heart and did not have the slightest bit of confidence. However, this was his duty. Even if he knew that he would die, he still had to give it a try. "Everyone, get ready to charge. The enemy only has 1,000 cavalry. They don't have as many people as we do." The Tushi general felt that the morale of the army had been affected. He didn't dare to wait any longer. Otherwise, who knew how many people would dare to charge? He only hoped that with the advantage of numbers, he could delay the 5-star army. In this way, he could find an opportunity for the king to break out of the encirclement. "Raise your guns." Just as the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry received the order to attack the 5-star army cavalry 2 miles away, Beta Persei, Chiovi, Dao Shao, and Ba Dao Jiang, the 4 captains, simultaneously issued the order to counterattack. Then, in the hands of the black cavalry, each of them took out a black Type 95 submachine gun. With the continuous development, especially under the guidance of Yang Chendong, and after taking out a large number of related books, the ammunition lathe in the arsenal of Crimson City was finally completed. Although the output was not very high due to various reasons, it could already produce 10,000 bullets a day. And with the completion of another lathe, this number would continue to increase. Yang Chendong also didn't need to rely on the ammunition box in the warehouse like before. He also didn't need to worry about whether the manually made bullets were qualified or not. Without any worries, the Black Cavalry was the first to be issued the Type 95 submachine gun. Moreover, each soldier usually carried 5 submachine guns, which was a total of 150 bullets. In addition, their whole body was protected by iron armor. It could be said that they were invincible in both offense and defense. Only the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were already scared out of their wits. They didn't have the slightest hint of fear. With the order to raise the guns, the muzzles immediately spat out tongues of fire towards the charging Turkmen cavalry. It was only a distance of 2 li. To the cavalry, it would only take a few seconds to cover the distance. However, these few seconds were like the difference between heaven and hell. The moment the gunshots rang out, the fate of the Turkmen cavalry was decided. Bam bam bam, bam bam bam. After the rapid-fire switch was turned on, they didn't even need to aim. They only needed to fire continuously and more Turkmen cavalry fell in their charge. This was simply a battle of attrition. No, it should be said that this was a massacre. Under the clash of cold weapons and high-grade firearms, the 3,000 Turkmen cavalry were like moths to a flame. They fell to the ground, charged again, and fell to the ground again. In just a few seconds, the battlefield beside Boston Lake was covered in blood. The ground was littered with the corpses of the cavalry. Among them was the Tushi general. The general, who still wanted to risk his life, was unfortunately hit by the first batch of bullets. Then he was devoured by the endless sea of bullets. "We surrender!" There were still 1,000 Turkmen cavalry. When they saw so many of their comrades fall in the blink of an eye, their hearts finally collapsed. No one wanted to die, let alone die in such a meaningless charge. Immediately, those who were still alive jumped off their war horses, threw down the sabers in their hands, and knelt on the ground. It was a scene of black crows and crows. Yang Chendong, who had been watching this scene like a bystander, shook his head lightly. Everything was within his expectations. He waved his hand lightly and said to the second company leader, "Dao Xiao, I'll leave this place to you guys. The rest of you, continue the pursuit." Although they said they were going to continue the pursuit, they only ran for 5 stars and surrounded the Turfan group that was still moving slowly with more than a dozen carriages. When the gunshots rang out, the sound of firecrackers rang out continuously. Harden Barter, who was sitting in the carriage, knew that it was over. He wasn't naive enough to think that someone would set off firecrackers here to welcome him. If that wasn't the case, then there was only one possibility. The sound just now wasn't firecrackers, but the sound of gunfire. He had long heard that the 5-star army possessed the most powerful firearms. He had also seen the power of the cannons. However, he did not expect that even the firearms were so powerful. Now that he was surrounded again, Harden Barter, who had nowhere to go, finally walked out of the largest carriage. What he saw was a group of 5-star army cavalry in black clothes and black armor. On his side, most of the 2,000 cavalrymen who were protecting them had already dismounted. They threw down their weapons and obediently squatted on the ground. Only less than 200 cavalrymen and 5 palace guards were still standing with swords in their hands. They were dutiful and loyal, but looking at their trembling bodies and arms, it could be seen that they were quite afraid at this moment. 3,000 cavalrymen, they couldn't even hold on for a minute. If they didn't die, they would surrender. How long could they hold on for? The scene in front of him made Harden Barter, who wanted to be tough, lose his confidence. When he saw Yang Chendong in the black cavalry, who was the only one wearing a golden battle robe, Harden Barter suddenly knelt on the ground. "Great Bugnam of Gojoseon, I surrender." In the end, Harden Barter chose to surrender. Surrounded on all sides, he had no other choice. The battlefield suddenly became very quiet. Except for the sound of the wind from Boston Lake, no other sounds could be heard. Everyone's eyes fell on Yang Chendong, who was wearing a golden battle robe, waiting for the king's decision. Yang Chendong didn't disappoint everyone. He quickly said, "Surrender? You don't deserve it." These words were like a heavy hammer that smashed into Harden Barter's heart. At this moment, his face was pale and his eyes were filled with endless fear. "But didn't you say that as long as I surrender, I will live?" "But why?" Yang Chendong coldly snorted and said with a cold expression, "Everyone only has one chance. Your father chose to surrender, but because you gave up this chance, hundreds of my generals died because of your fake surrender. Just based on this, you will definitely die. Where is Ba Daojiang?" "Subordinate is here." Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting for a long time, shouted and rode out. It was Ba Daojiang who had negotiated with King Shiza. Because of this, hundreds of Mongol soldiers were killed by arrows. Although Yang Chendong didn't mean to blame him for this matter, it had always been a knot in his heart. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge, how could he let it go? He immediately stared at Harden Barter, who was trembling like a sieve. He thought that as the king of a country, as long as he was willing to surrender, no one would refuse. However, Yang Chendong didn't feel at ease at all. At this moment, Harden Barter, who was shrouded in death, felt his body turn cold. His face was pale as he stammered, "No. You can't kill me. I am the king of Turpan. If you kill me, you will attract the curses and fear of others. This won't be good for your future unification. I have already surrendered. You can't kill me." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.